Hello everyone, how are we doing? Sound, thank you. Thank you for the sound update. Yes, I'm wearing the Corgi Avengers shirt. Okay. How 96821. Lichens not pursuing Principal else makes sense, as really it's not worth the risk. Yeah, it does. Prince of Wales not pursuing the Bismarck. That's slightly more interesting, but you can understand why they're having enough technical issues. They do try and keep within radar range and keep it under monitor as long as they can. Hello, Rick Vasava. Hello, Frank Sado. Calvin Gasberg, praise be Clarke and all. Yep. Hello, Night This is Mitchell 67. Hello, Dr. Clarke. Hello. Any idea when Bill Trump 76 will be available? Well, we recorded it this morning, so it will probably be available Wednesday. Hello, Carl. Thanks for to see. What I was trying to ask about was about Vulnerals was why do you think there were all three in service organized only just one of the 4 CVGs at Philippine Sea Battle? Were they to be distributed as needed? Not really. The thing is, you often do group together groups of ships by service, by class, unless you have enough of those ships to do multiple classes. It's like you did it with battleships and cruisers. It makes logistics easier, command and control easier, and it makes operations easier because they perform the same way. So if you all need to turn to starboard, they all turn to starboard at roughly the same time. And to take the roughly the sort of same course. So it's easier to operate if all the ships are the same. So another of those standardization advantages. I find it even stranger since that IJ never actually engaged at CVG. Well, that's not really thought about when you start putting a group together. Whether or not you presume the enemy are going to engage you. If they don't, well, luck out. No one's going to complain too much. Lucky for the Japanese in a way. A lot of guns. I know it's cheesy, but today was Dad Baked Pizza Day. Today was also Dr. Clarke have a pizza day. In fact, both Dr. Clarkes had a pizza today, and and Mum basically went, "I'm having a pizza as well," because, well, it turned out that way. Hello, George Newman. Hello, Sawa Albertatsky. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Jonathan Burrow. Hello, Anuraj Paul. Hello. Let's see. Have you ever heard of Open Dyslexic Font? It's made to help with reading. Looks pretty cool. It is pretty cool. I haven't ever used it myself, but I have heard about it. It is pretty cool. I'm just going to go and close a lot of tabs. Those tabs to the right. Bum bum bum. I now only have the I'll close that as well, because that's apparently overloading my little system. My poor little laptop is feeling the pressure. Yes, don't worry. After tax bill, we get a nice tower to look after you, computer. Don't worry. Right. Hello, Ian Winter. Hello, Yickers. Hello, DG40. Oh, good lord, that's jumped down. Hello, Jonathan Burrow. Oh, yeah, I've said that. Hello. Oh, yeah, I've got the sun. Hello, Evan Hund. Sound is on now. That's good. Hello, Bug Guy 829. Hello, Depth of Cruz. Hello, Sena Canero. Hello, Televanica. Hello, Blackburn. Hello, Matthias Slavic. Hello, Derp Squad. Hello, Jay Lingworth. If HMS Hood had survived and Prison Preserved, would the illusion of beautiful look fade over time? Doubtful. Let's be honest, I still consider Belfast gorgeous, and she's been around for quite a while. Senator, how useful would well-maintained, long refitted versions of Sovereign of the Seas would have been in the Napoleonic Wars? Probably not as useful as you'd hope. But by the time she'd have been rebuilt so much that the Sovereign of the Seas would not have been the Sovereign of the Seas. It would have been. It has the name Sovereign of the Seas. It would have been a first rate, but it might have had quite a lot of the gold inlay from the rear of the original Sovereign of the Seas on it. But it would not be the Sovereign of the Seas that was originally built. There would not be a single bit of timber in that ship which was in it when it was first launched. It would have been through some very, very major rebuilds. John Romero, what was the longest age of sail first rate? I honestly have no idea. I know that the Spanish ones got up there, and I think probably it's the Spanish, but some of the British and the French ones were not exactly that small. Especially the ones built in the 1830s. Even the American ones in the 1830s weren't that tiny. Hello, not quite on the rations drink, aka Sean. Answer report. If the British pull a trick with Tiger, similar to what the Japanese did with Heihei, how does a World War II service look? Convoy escort, cruiser hunter, or something else? Probably a mixture of convoy escort and cruiser hunter. Probably. Let's be honest, with 13.5-inch guns, she'd be useful as a cruiser hunter. Let's put it this way. You would probably have found Tiger would have appeared in the South Atlantic, because that's the sort of space you send it. It's going to run into something like the Deutsche, like the Graf Spee. In which case, the Graf Spee doesn't have a fun time, because let's rerun the Battle River Plate. That's bad enough, but let's say add on in as well as Exeter, you have HMS Tiger there with 13.5-inch guns. I'm sorry, there's a very small schmear where the Graf Spee used to be, because it's dealing with 16 6-inch guns, 6 8-inch guns, 8 13.5-inch guns. Okay, 13.5-inch being what they were. They might have actually upgraded. The interesting thing is, could they have upgraded the 13.5-inch turret to take 14-inch guns? Probably, without too much effort. And so you might have had twin 14-inch turrets, especially as they're building them already for the King George V's. So you could have found her with a rearmed with 14-inch guns, in which case she becomes very useful. Budguy 69, have you seen the USN's new DDX concept? Yeah, if you're talking about the thing which looks like a Italian PPA has gone on an expansion mission, yes. Rex Father, let's see. What do you think of this idea? The UK keeps East Falklands and Argentina gets West Falklands. Would that ever be sensible? No. That would just cause more conflict. They'd never be happy with just West Falklands. And what about the people on the Falklands Islands? Don't they get a choice? I don't like any concept where you start telling people what they can have. It's a case of no. Let the people choose. The people of the Falkland Islands have chosen in the last election. I think it was only like 3 votes to join Argentina, and the rest were all to stay as they are. Until there is a convincing majority that want to go to Argentina, they are British, and I don't think there's ever going to be the way Argentina keeps going on with them. I keep trying to explain to people you get more you attract more flies with honey than you do with vinegar, but it doesn't seem to be that anyone's that goes for the honey. So yeah, they're British, and the British are quite happy to have the Falkland Islands in a way. It's quite useful, especially at the moment looking long term. Breakfast Sun, Dr. Clarke, no doubt you've answered this many times, but how would you classify the Gneisenau? I know a lot call a battleship, but with 11-inch guns doesn't make sense. If you're talking about Gneisenau as in the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau's sisters, they are battleships. 11-inch guns are not. They are battleships. They're not exactly... They are designed to be upgraded with 15-inch when they come available, but they're built at a time when Germany has a maximum of 11-inch guns. Gun size does not decide whether you're a battleship, battlecruiser, or what you are. Construction decides what you are. They are built as, I would argue, a fast battleship by their design and structure. Which is why some people try and say they're a battlecruiser. They're not. They're not. They are battleships, but with small guns. In winter, if they converted the Admiral class to carriers, what would they have done with the Courageous class? Refitted as cruiser leader? Refitted with triple 12-inch and more armor? Well, they'd have either scrapped them or refitted them as carriers as well. That's your honest options. If they have to change out... Well, there is another option, and this is going to sound strange. So, if they decide they want the Admiral class become carriers, and Courageous and Glorious are to not be carriers, are instead again kept in service, they probably become proto-heavy cruisers armed with... Well, I doubt they'd be allowed to keep battleship-level guns, but probably 9.2-inch guns. So it's one of those fun scenarios. And I have got some books to go through tonight, so we'll go through them in a second. But, you know, fun times. Wanted to get ahead on the questions before I started the books. Paul Eswick, good evening. Did Bill Trump's recording go well? Yes, it did. This message is 5 minutes in. I'm only 8 minutes behind you. 9 minutes behind you. Marang Dash. Hello, this is Clarke. I know nothing about naval history, but I'm enjoy annoying my partner who's an ardent fan. Can I see your corgi? Unfortunately, the corgi's currently inside having his tea, but when he's out, he might get wandered down here. Don't worry. 9681. Did you guys get my suggestions for build trumps? We did. They're probably going to make it into next week's episode, not this week's. This week's was us just going, okay, what do we have to rant about from over the Christmas break? For example, obviously not meant to be an excuse, but what are the chances that hazardous materials may have contributed to any negative effects on the ship's crew? Perhaps even decision-making, including on behalf of Beatty. Yes, there's a lot of stuff around. They go to quite a lot of work, though, to make sure they don't get exposed to it. And they do understand most of the things they're putting in, so I'd say not much. But you never know. Senator, how would HMS Victory fare in the Anglo-Dutch Wars? There wouldn't have been many Anglo-Dutch wars, because unless the Dutch managed to capture her somehow at the in the Battle of the Thames, they would probably have found themselves losing a lot of ships to her. She's very fast for a ship of that period, and she's very heavily armed. Azuki, I've read recently about the USN DGX program. Looks like the Iron Bucks, finally. Have you heard about them? From the description, looks like the USN has regained sanity after a bad trip. Actually, yes, we have. And Bill Trumps today pretty much goes on about them. And honestly, we're not big fans. Because we think that whilst it sounds sanity, it actually, once you read it, you realise it's... we're going to put a new cover on a book. And not even the sensible cover they've got that already works. So the recent DDX concept is to fan the Reveal class on any book steroids. Well, let me just check up what the Italians actually call their things. I just call them the PPA. Yeah, I think so. The founder reveal. Yeah, well, have a look at the picture of them, and have a look at a picture of it. And there's a reason I tweeted it out and went to people, yep, the Americans have just copied and pasted something. Thanks, Madam. Let's see, what is the RAFE for our strategic plans as everyone builds junior coal fleets of heavy coastal defense ships? What does the RM build? Exactly the same as it's always built. Because everyone else is building coastal defense ships, that's fine, but you still need to go and find them. So you can't build a coastal defense. You're not going to build coastal defense ships. You're going to build battleships. This is the thing. On the response to the junior coal is to build what you're already building. Just to make sure you have some fast quick firing guns on those things you're building. So if their destroyer flotillas and torpedo boat flotillas, well, their torpedo boat flotillas get in range, you can take them out. Probably a lot more destroyers than they even do build for the channel, but you know, that's just because they like destroyers. They have a cool name. Senator, I think it's far more than just economics. The Falklanders I've met have been some of the most fiercely patriotic people I've ever known. It's kind of like Gibraltans I've met have been some of the most fiercely patriotic people I've ever known. I think there was original idea for Hood to have a lot more torpedo tubes. Like Sokotra, I'm not sure if it exactly was 10. Hi, Steve Richards. You can ask a question on Triple Turret anytime you like. That's right. What do you think of Bill Trump's suggestions? Well, I said they're going for next week. Paul Boswick, really long term for Falklands. They are a long way from most places. Perhaps a long range missile range out towards South Georgia? That'd be fun. Considering this is US DDGX concept, that will change over next years. My thinking is that the US DDGX complex concept is about as conceptual as the last 4 replacements for the Burks have been. When they actually place an order for a contract, then I'll believe they're actually doing something other than building more Burks. Senator, has a weapon ever been rejected on ethical grounds in naval warfare? Chemical and biological warfare doesn't seem too viable for fast-moving ships. Not really. Ethical, probably chemical, but chemical and biological weapons, as you say, are not that great for ships. And also, salt water. They don't like to admit this, but biological warfare and salt water do not like to mix. If you and this is one of the things, what the ships wash their decks down with when they are attacked by chemical biological weapons, salt water, and it's corrosive. It's not good for the ships either, but it's even worse for the stuff which is on top of them. So, let's see. Are you aware of any unused cruiser designs that maybe should have gone with? Well, I'd like the quadruple turrets on the Edinburgh and Belfast if they could have made them work. I'd really quite like 9.2-inch heavy cruisers. There was a particularly very interesting Dido which had even more 5.25-inch, and instead of being on an Arefuser hull, was on a town class hull. And how do I put this? So it had, I think, it had a construction of, it went 1 twin turret for there, 2 twin, 1 twin, fore and aft. And then it had 2 more twins in the center, sort of wings. So each it could fire 8 5.25 forward, I think. 14 on each beam. And, it's just interesting. So, how would World War One go if the Deutschland class replaced the pre-dreads of German soldiers? Well, the Deutschland class were doing better than the pre-dreads. What would happen though is, well, the Deutschland class, better than the pre-dreads, they'd still have the joy of facing the Queen Elizabeth class. And the thing is, they're about as fast as the Queen Elizabeth class are new, because it's 26 and 25 knots from memory. So honestly, actually, if they've replaced the pre-dreads, depending on when they replace the pre-dreads, you've probably got the RN bumping up speeds of its ships. If they replace them pre-war and the RN realizes, hang on, they've got the Deutschland class and realizes what they are and goes, ouch, we need to replace those, we need to match those, then you probably have a very interesting effect on cruiser construction and on battleship construction. In that you probably do get some 9.2-inch gun cruisers. The Hawkins class, probably the Hawkins Frobishers would be 9.2-inch gun cruisers. So here, how? Hang on, Desert Foxo. Hello, Desert Foxo. Don't think I've seen you before tonight. What was the idea of torpedoes on dreadnoughts and pre-dreadnoughts? Were they just like fancy? No, they could be steered, and they were quite useful things. They were basically daring to finish off at fights. There was the very real prospect that you could be at the end of the battle and down to your secondary armament and could not sink the actual hulk that's away from you, and you need to sink it. So put a torpedo in it. That's pretty much the thing. Plus, it's a backup weapon if you are yourself heavily damaged and the enemy's closing in for the kill. Well, you've still got torpedoes. So that's pretty much the torpedoes are for, and they are used a few times. Let's see. Which nation empire has had the longest running navy in history? Well, I think that probably goes to the British Royal Navy. It's either them or the Mongolian Navy. The Mongolian Navy's been pretty long running, but it's had gaps, whereas the Royal Navy's been pretty constant. Swedish Navy is fairly up there and it's old. Longest consistent. If you're going for the longest running, as in it's been constantly in service and hasn't had its name changed, etc., I think you're probably dealing with the Royal Navy. But that's off the top of my head. Frank Sonner, don't see which nations the sailors have felt the most honoured when their leaders came aboard. I think they always feel fairly honoured. I have to admit, the most interesting reaction I've had from sailors was the U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Marine pilots and crew squadron team aboard HMS Queen Elizabeth when Queen Elizabeth came aboard her and chatted with them, and there was one who apparently turned around and said, "Show me to the Queen's enemies, I will crush them with my fists." They suddenly experienced an ardent bout of monarchism. So that's the British just turning the U.S. Marine Corps into the British extension of the British Armed Forces, one squadron at a time, thanks to the Queen's visit. I'm sure that wasn't the pub speaking. Carl goes on. Hello. Senator Kinnear and Dr. Clarke. Very early shell guns were frowned upon, but that might have been that we do not admit that they tend to explode, so it's not fair. There were all sorts of issues early on, but they kept the guns actually were implemented, so that's the thing. It's kind of like torpedoes and submarines. We don't like them, but we're still doing them. So one of the things. Royal Navy in the 1920s. We would like to see submarines banned. Who has the largest submarine service in the world? We do. Senator, would you approve of a British super battleship with super firing 14-inch quads fore and aft? That wouldn't be a super battleship. If you have quad 16-inch guns forward, fore and aft, super firing as well, so you have 16-inch guns, that I would approve of. But let's be honest, if one is firing 16-inch guns, then one is going to be moving small mountains with the results. Legend Productions. Isle subject banned weaponry. Aren't cluster bombs now banned? Was there ever a warship equivalent? Cluster bombs weren't really that good at warships. As far as I know, nothing's actually been banned. They tried to get hot shot banned at one point. They tried to get shells banned at one point. They tried to get... Lots of things have tried to be banned, but none of them have actually ever been banned for warships. There's all sorts of bans in personal weapons. You're not supposed to use dum-dum bullets, etc. Stephen Richards, I was listening to Drax yesterday. He mentioned the design of a ship with one forward double, one aft, but the wings were triple turrets. Anything to do with our photo? There is certainly some stuff we're looking into. Well, Frank Spanner, do you know the first RN ship to have radar and the first launch missiles? The first RN ship to have radar, well, that I covered when I was doing my own little 1920s technology thing, 1930s technology video. Let me look it up. So that's actually, I've put out that on the video, but let me just find the PowerPoint. What did Naval History Live? That folder. And interwar logistics, interwar naval aircraft. Where have I put it? I saved it somewhere else. No. Where have I put it? Night fighting. First RN vessel to be fitted with radar was HMS Saltburn, fitted with a Type 79X. Second radar vessel, that was in October 1936. Next one was HMS Sheffield, which was fitted with the Type 79Y in 1938. And third was Rodney, which got October 1938, got the same one, same type. HMS Curlew, C-class cruiser, got the Type 79Z in September 1939. And then we have Dido, October 1940. And Whale, this is of Type 281, the next type of radar. First is fitted to Dido in October 1940. And then Prince of Wales gets it in January 1941 as well. It's fun. There was another question. There was another one about that. There was with the radar. First launch missiles. Oh, I can't remember that one off the top of my head, but I'm sure I'll have a look for that at some point. That's it. If Rodney Anson Howe became Hood's sister ship, what becomes Nelson's sister ship? Possibly Collingwood. Possibly they make it Nelson and Collingwood. Matthew Melazaki, did Doug Clarke, out of curiosity, did the World War II KGV class have a bulbous bow? Not really. Not really. Next one, Mongolian Navy. Yeah, Mongol has 1 to 2 speedboats now, as Seneca Nero points out. There's Voxer. Did the Germans have the diesel to fuel the Deutschlands in World War I? Not really. But it will be fun to watch them try. Colonel Guzman, the Panzer Chief in the Jutland night action with the Sea Cat radar, hydrophones, and torpedoes had the potential to rack some kills, though. Stinging but not lethal to the RN. True, they do if they are. But in the nicest way, if the Germans are able to maintain the Sea TAC radar long enough to actually have them available in Jutland, I'll be very, very surprised for them. Hydrophones, possibly. But there's a lot of finicky systems. I don't know at all. What was the status of Anton, Howe, and Rodney when construction was cancelled in 1919? Well, Hull's still around, but when negotiations for Washington Naval Treaty commenced. I think they were. They were at various stages, but I think the hulls were still around. They could have done something with them. It's not beyond belief. Let's put it this way. Or beyond the wit of humankind. Next one, I'd like to see. If the UK is the best at naval innovation, at points they were, but there are points that other people have achieved better. Who was the best at army innovation? Honestly, I'd say the Dutch were always fairly good at army innovation. The French tend to come with tactics which win a one battle and they try and apply them to every other battle they ever go to for the next few years, and they come with a new tactic and then they're obsessed with that one. The Germans are really not that innovative. They're very strict and disciplined, but they never seem to be that innovative. That's probably going to get me into trouble, but it's things like, if we consider Blitzkrieg, well, that comes from the British work on Lightning War and armoured cavalry operations by Fuller and that group. If we look at quite a lot of good ideas, they don't come in Germany. Germany implements them, but they don't really come up with them. It's kind of a difficult one. The US Army tends to be fairly decent at innovation, but even they can become very interesting. So the 14-inch quad ship had a broadside of 24 14-inch guns. Well, that would make someone cry. Secretary 3-1. Why did the British decide that Too Courageous and Furious were better carry conversion than the Hood sisters, Anson and Hoe and Rodney? Well, Furious was already converted, and the bright spark who made that decision was a guy called Beatty. So yeah, we'll leave it to him, because he's one of those people who said, "Well, we don't need that many aircraft, do we?" Remember that famous quote? I think that I can see there being a worldwide need of 5 computers. There will never be any reason for someone to have a PC in their home. And now I have, well, there's probably there's at least a couple in this house. Both me and my sister have one. Sun after some of all the things both you and Draco said about cruisers, the way the Iron likes to recycle to speed, how likely is it pre-dread turrets on the guns on the first heavy cruisers? Interestingly, there is a good potential. Definitely, there's the option that the metal is being used for it rather than getting new metal. Sujin 90. Did the RN consider up-armouring the 8-inch turrets on the counties since they did so for the Gloucesters? Yes, for some. It affects top weight, remember, and you always have to be very careful about top weight. Report, possibly Duncan or Hornby are good examples, but I think they might have gone with Collingwood. Duncan and Hornby tend to come slightly further down the list. During Seneca Nero, what benefit had central battery ironclads over high-sided ones like White Trust Warrior? To be honest, it allows you to concentrate and fix your armor. But to be honest, I would argue that HMS Warrior is a central battery ironclad as well, because the armor is all over the central base of a. It's very thick in the one part in the center of the hull, and the bow and the stern not so thick. In winter, do you think the Iron should have a squadron of non-nuclear submarines for more local use, to free up nuclear boats for Pacific and Arctic use? I wouldn't say no to them having a few for the for UK waters and for the Mediterranean, etc. But the problem becomes, and I would see, I'd like them, but I'd like decent numbers of SSNs as well. And I know the trouble the Royal Navy's trying to avoid by focusing in on the SSNs. It's basically so that someone doesn't go, well, that's an attack submarine, and that's an attack submarine, but that costs a quarter of that, so we're going to buy all those. And really, they can't do each other's job. And if you have to pick one, you pick the SSN, because that's a 65% solution for the SSK, but the SSK is only a 40% solution for the SSN. So you go with the SSN. Let's see. What do you hope the James Webb Telescope finds? Something fun. We need to get the fun back into space research. Dreadnought. Hey, Dr. Clarke, how was the seakeeping on the Dreadnought and Nelson class? Not that bad. It was fairly decent, and they managed to get higher speed when they wanted to than they were even supposed to, so they did quite well in seakeeping. It was interesting, but they weren't really as wet as some of their counterparts were at the time. So I would, let's put it this way, I'd prefer to be, if I was in a big storm, I'd prefer to be on a Nelson class than King George V. Let's see. What role did any RN personnel have in the Western Front War from Model 1 away from the coast? Well, there was the fleet, there was the Royal Naval Air Service, there was Royal Naval Air Service armoured cars, and there was the Royal Navy divisions, which a lot of reservists end up fighting in, which was not fun, and was not what they'd signed up for, but they did well. I don't remember. So when did Norfolk and Suffolk get their radar sets? Bear in mind the role they played in being the first British ships to get spot and track from Bismarck. I think they had the same sets as Sheffield, so they got 79 Ys, which would have been about 1940. They'd have got those in. Second, what if the King George V class from Model 2 replaced the King George V class of Model 1? Well, the optics are fairly good. Fusing's fairly good. 14-inch guns are pretty rapid firing, and they're fairly fast. That's not good for the German Navy. Maybe if... I don't know if the RN will be any better at keeping the radar going for them than the Germans would be able to keep the radar going. Although the RN does have far more electronics experience and infrastructure to draw from than the Germans to do so. So my honest opinion is I doubt they manage to keep it going, but they might salvage enough to be able to reverse engineer and start something up which they can develop into a radar. As for the rest, well, the optics are good, and fast battleships. The RM will use them. The King George V might end up being attached to the battle cruiser group instead of the Queen Elizabeth class battleships, which could have an interesting impact because those things are, well, they could cause serious damage, serious damage. Okay, have any recent national leaders visited their troops in war zones besides last three former US presidents? Pretty much everyone goes to visit their troops in war zones at one point or another, i.e., prime ministers, etc. in the UK. Usually not the Queen, but they tend to go there. So anyway, what if in World War II the RN had the admirals and the courageous Clarke converted to aircraft carriers? Well, okay. So that gives them 3 more big aircraft carriers. Now, if that's come in addition to tonnage, as extra tonnage, that means they have 10 carriers on entry into World War II. So expect multi-carrier operations, because even if you lose Courageous and Glorious, you're still at 8 rather than dropping down to 5. So that changes things. Those carriers are also quite big. Knight 6831 has asked what would they be armed with? Well, they probably have air groups to similar as... Well, they probably have an air group larger than Courageous and Glorious to have. So we'd probably be talking somewhere in the region of 90-odd aircraft to the others 70. And the others sort of 60. Because they're that much bigger in terms of beam and draft, so they can take more top weight, so they can take a bigger, more articulate hangar. There's also the fact the only rough sketch I've ever seen of what an Admiral class might look like as a carrier, because from that period, which is contemporary, has it as a deck-edge lift. Because they felt they could balance it and they thought it might be sensible for them. So there is also that introduction into the RN. It would have had, if it had been done pre-Washington, they'd probably ended up with an armored deck. They'd have been a pretty interesting ship. They would have probably ended up with dual-purpose 6-inch guns or 4-inch guns. I'm not sure, one or the other. That's their main armament. So it would have been, again, like Courageous and Glorious conversions. The interesting question is, with a larger carriers like that in the service, the RN might end up be tempted to going for twin-engined aircraft. Because if you're looking for long-range reliable strike, you can build aircraft which can a twin-engine aircraft that can take a torpedo a long way. And that could have a big impact. It would have an impact on the size of air groups, but it would also have an impact on operational range and capabilities. So it's an interesting scenario to start off with as what would be the impact. Let's put it this way, it would not be something which was a simple butterfly wings effect. It would be something which was a hurricane effect. Good evening, Greg Salsky. Gasberg. 64 kilobytes of RAM will be enough forever and for everything. Yeah, those were the days. Obviously, the best examples of nations willing to spend their money on warships are HMS Australia and HMS New Zealand. To an extent. John O'Mara, was Taiho a good design or not? Taiho had some good principles in it and could have been a good design, but it was badly implemented. 900 productions. Take the 4 Admiral class battlecruisers, all of whom are to be completed to at least the standards of the completed hood when commissioned, and put them in Jutland. How do they do? They're under Jellicoe's command. Yes, I know it doesn't make sense, but neither does the whole question. Point being, BT's not in charge of them. In which case, let's say they've replaced 3rd Cruiser Squadron, the 3rd Battle Cruiser Squadron with them, and they've put them under the command of Hood. Nice reason. And that we can actually put a reason for them to be with Jellicoe, because they are the newest squadron. They're being trained up. They've gone to the gunnery ranges, much like 3rd Squadron went to be trained up. So Hood's with them. Hood's in charge. They're being trained up. Has all 4 of them? Oh, he's going to use them as the fast wing to go fast. And those things will be able to go fast. They'll be able to outpace everyone, so they'll be able to run circles around the German battle fleet. So basically, Jellicoe will probably give them orders to go rain and go long. So when the Germans try to do the turn away, instead of being able to turn away through the smoke and get away from the ground fleet, they'll turn away and find themselves facing, I don't know, 32 15-inch guns raining death down on them, because those things have got behind them. It just makes Shear's life a nightmare. Actually, let's see. I used to love for reviewing a book here, maybe the better Bismarck part. I will probably be reviewing the book, but I have got a book up here which I want to get to first. I've got a couple books up here, actually. Stay. It's good muscle training, really. Yep. So we'll get to them in a second. Hello, Vice Admiral. Good evening. Just coming in from Handel. Desert Roxo. We all know that the various failures that were Nazi Wunderwaffe. Do you know of any other innovation weapons in 70 ships that could massively change the war if it worked? See, the trouble is there's nothing that really changes the war even if they work. Japanese get the super battleships. They're still they're not probably going to prolong the war or change it. Interesting thing would be if ASDIC had worked as they presumed it would. They thought it would work because of exercises. If ASDIC had worked as in exercises on the German submarine fleet, that would have had a massive impact on World War II. But it didn't. Who'd have thought? Hello, Jack Ray. So, what if the RN got the 2-power standard for naval treaties? In which case, what, they're allowed the same strength as the American and Japanese combined? There's a very happy Royal Navy. At that point, there's a Royal Navy going, yes, we're allowed how many? Oh, yes, 30. Let's see, 18 plus roughly 25, 26 battleships. 25, 26 cavalry ships. Yeah, that's the Royal Navy, which is sitting there going, come at me, world. At which point, honestly, you probably get a very different World War II, because the Royal Navy would have been able to maintain 3 fleets, each centered on 8 capital ships, each with their own appropriate cruisers and all sorts of things. And they'd have only probably needed 1 fleet to be able to match the... Well, let's say that the Japanese are still allowed the 7-to-10 ratio on the Americans. So then they're 17. British are at 17. So the the Americans have, let's say, 20 capital ships. Let's say they're allowed that for treaties. I know it's not 20, but well, let's say the British would have 34. Then they'd have roughly 11 per squadron. They'd have 11 based in the Indian Ocean Fleet, 11 in the Mediterranean Fleet, and 11 in... Honestly, there just wouldn't be a navy on the world which could match them. In the case of Germany going, we're going to war the British. The British going, you're going to war the home fleet. No one else is bothering to come away. And the Italians going, we're going to war. With what? You. There are like 4 carriers here. Bye bye. We have 6 battleships in our entire fleet. You have 11 in the Mediterranean fleet alone. Ouch. Japanese. We have 14 battleships. Yay. The British going, how many did the Germans have again? 6. Well, no, they have 4. Well, we better be good and leave 8. So we'll take 6 from the home fleet. How many did the Italians have? Well, after the 4 carriers hit, 1, we will take 12 from the... Oh, no, we'll be nice. We'll take 10. We'll take 8 from there, and we'll take 5 from the home fleet and 6 from the Mediterranean fleet. Stick 11, add 11 onto the 11 in... Well, no, 6 from the home fleet, because it's 6 to down to 6. 6 to 12, and then 5. So, yeah, that's actually what's right. 11 onto that, so that's 22. Okay, hello, Japan, we have 22 battleships. It wouldn't be a nice time. Habakkuk could have been interesting, but I don't think I would have changed the war too much. Paul, in good news, it's been confirmed that HMS Ambuscade will be transferred to Scotland as a museum ship once she's decommissioned. She'll probably be the only Falklands surface warship to be preserved since Plymouth is gone. Yeah, she's currently in... Let's say she's a Type 21 frigate. Yeah, she's in the Pakistan Navy. Oh, that'd be nice. Be nice to have her back. Right on, let's see, RN armored cars. Could you say more about that? Yeah, in World War One, the RN had armored cars. They developed. It's the thing that really embarrasses the British Army when you start talking to them about armored warfare. Is you go, well, the Royal Navy developed the tank. Yeah, they did. Who developed the first armored cars? There were flying units that had the armored cars. Which part of the flying units had... Was it the Royal Flying Corps? No. Basically, the Royal Navy worked out that their pilots were getting shot down. And they thought, well, we can't get to them that quickly. And then what happens if they're in no man's land? Then it's very difficult to get to them. We need to get to them and get out quickly. Okay. Armoured car section, which would literally go rumbling out with machine guns on, especially converted Rolls Royces, blasting away with their machine guns, pick up the pilots and bring them back. Stop them being taken prisoner, kept you flying, worked, occasionally used them to support other operations. Yeah, fun times. The Royal Navy finds itself with 22 Astute class SSN and 40 Upholder SKs. How are they used? Well, the Upholders are going in for a massive refit because they're kind of out of date by this point. And, well, then, guess what? How they're used. You probably would have the Upholders... You possibly even have some forward base down in the Falkland Islands and some forward base in Singapore, but most likely they would get based between the UK and Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands. You might get 4 bases, and you probably have 24 in the UK, split between 2 bases of 12, and the remaining 16. Probably 5, 5, and 6. Or 6, 6, and 4. 6, 6, and 4, probably. Actually, 6 Gibraltar, 6 Falkland Islands, and 4 Singapore. The 22 Astutes, well, they'll be based on the UK, although there might be units, facilities made for them in the Falklands if you've already got a different submarine force down there. And then because you could base a Pacific squadron off the Falklands of Astutes. So if you're running if you're running 3 squadrons of 7, you'd have 2 based in the UK, 1 in Faslane, 1 in probably Plymouth or Portsmouth. Probably which one? Probably Plymouth. You might have it running on Devonport, and you'd have the others running out of the Falklands, because then they could do the Pacific. You've got North Atlantic covered by the Faslane boats, and you've got rest of the world coverage from the Plymouth boats. How many XL UDVs would be needed for the RN? What are they using them for? Where are they basing them? Are they as carrier-based ones? There is a lot of options before you start answering those sort of figures. But guys, what do you think of the Des Moines class hangar setup compared to other World War II era cruisers? Des Moines class. Well, I got a helipad later, but let's see. Let's have a look. It seemed to be fairly interestingly efficient, although most I can see, everyone keeps referring to them as having No, I get it. So it's crane lift at. Well, I have seen worse. There are worse ideas out there. But I was confirming if it was the one. I was hoping it wasn't, but it was. There are, honestly, this much for muchness. Once you're dealing with these systems, none of them are perfect. All of them have to involve a crane at some point to load them onto the catapults. It's far easier once you have a helipad and a hangar. Desert Foxer, if the US had joined World War I 2 years early, how would the Standards do working in the ground fleet, and how well would the Wyoming do with her after turret farm? Well, if the Standards had come to work with the ground fleet, they'd have been working alongside the ground fleet, and the ground fleet would have integrated them to an extent. They'd have found squadrons for them. Would they have got rid of some of the older dreadnoughts to the Channel Squadron? Possibly, possibly not. Some of the American units might have found their way to the Channel Squadron as a way to give them something to do important, but not too important. But yeah, they would probably have been useful. What would they have done in terms of operating? Well, if they'd been at if they'd been at Jutland, if they'd been in which they would have been around in time for Jutland, then you would have had even more of a preponderance of fire. And the thing is, at that point, Jellicoe might well risk things, because the point is, there is no way he can. At a certain point, you are not risking that much. There's also the fact that the Grand Fleet would be that much longer when out in line for nights. night sailing, in which case the odds of the Germans sneaking through, there'd be an extra 2 squadrons of battleships possibly behind them. So yeah, that's just not good for the Germans. What did Ambuscade do in the Falklands War? She was a Type 21 frigate. She provided gunfire support and she provided anti-submarine warfare security. Azoski, if the RN kept armoured cruisers after World War I, they did for a bit, but not too long, could they be refitted in the interwar and be useful in World War II? Some of the older ones could, some of the new ones could have been. They could have been refitted if they'd been refitted with turbine power and but had their speed bumped up and all sorts of things. Yes, but it depends how much tonnage you had to play with. Alexander, Dr. C, would the Roman or Ottoman navies have been around longer than the RN? No. The RN's been around since the 1500s. And no. Sort of, it's been around. The RN is dated since Henry VIII's reign. Is when we normally date it from. And the Ottomans went, and the Romans went, and the Romans navies was. A Roman navy was always an interesting organization. We'll leave that to Simon Elliott to discuss in more detail. He knows it far better than me. Sim Richard, there is a drawing of Hood as an aircraft carrier. Have you one and you can show us? I don't have one that I can show you, and I'm going to go up and try and get. I've been having chat with I'm having chat with my friends in Govan and my friends in Newcastle and my friends in the Mersey. We're all sort of to go. How's the archive looking? Is there anything in there? And I'm going to be starting back with archive research soon. Got to spend some time in Greenwich first. Hi, Danny Wright. Vice Lawson, what would hurt the Allies more? 4 clone Deflingers, 4 Dark Clone Endoms, or 4 clone Seedlers? Including the plot armor. I'd say Deflingers would hurt the Allies more. Because that could cause serious trouble at various battles. Endoms would have caused issues, but they would have ended up the same way Endom did. And same with Seedlers. But the Flingers would have caused the Allies more trouble. They'd have had to build up to match it. Not a wolf. Could they have tested Aztec properly pre-war, or was it a case of no anything is too dangerous? No, they did the best they could of testing it in exercise conditions, but there is one thing pushing a destroyer to war levels in peacetime. Because even if you do muck up, the odds are the crew are going to get away still alive. Pushing a submarine to war levels in peacetime, if you muck up, the whole crew dies. So there's always a bit of a gingerness in terms of your operating of submarines. And that's where, in exercises, the false positives for ASDIC come from. It's not so much the case of the surface ships operating, it's the way you operate the submarines. You don't tend to do as many risks. Plus, there's the fact that submarine technology and ability to go underwater and maintain a certain depth improved dramatically in the period from World War One to World War Two. So, yeah, that's the reality of what you're dealing with. Senator, in your courageous and glorious survive scenario, what would the RN do with both the German and Italian Navy being neutralized by 1941 and Japan joined the war when it did in our time? If courageous and glorious survive and RN and German, the German Navy won't be neutralized, but with them down to effectively 1, if not 2 battle, a probability of 1 battleship. Because let's be honest, if Bismarck's still gone out, even though Gneisenau and Scharnhorst have been sunk, if Bismarck's still gone out, then they're in trouble. If the Germans still won Norway, they're in a better position, but they've lost Scharnhorst and Eisenhower. This is the courageous and glorious scenario I did in a video about them. If they survive, and the Italian fleet is down to one battleship, then probably you're talking quite a large fleet ends up going to the Far East. It could have gone there earlier in 1941. Knowing that because they're fighting a war with the Italians and the Germans, the British would probably have, especially pre-December 1941, would have probably based it in Ceylon, Sri Lanka, as we now think of it, and they would have probably sent. You're probably talking the armored carriers and Ark Royal would go. Maybe Unicorn if she's been finished in time, because they might have kept her going. Might decide to finish her with more carriers to support and with the Far East as a potential option. It might have been done. But it would be the armored carriers and it would be Ark Royal. You would probably have, especially if Crete, etc., hasn't fallen because of the lack of Italian intervention to support the Germans, then then you have a different scenario in the Mediterranean. You may or may not be using aircraft to cover convoys, but you might well have got the as I said in the video, you might have got the north coast of North Africa, back under sort of British control, because the resupplies wouldn't have happened without the Italians to cover it, because Royal Navy cruisers and destroyers could have been far more active in prosecuting operations if there's no battleships and the heavy cruisers have been seriously impacted. That's why British have heavy cruisers on the convoys. This is why when authors say, "Oh, they shouldn't have had heavy cruisers and the heavy cruisers were pointless," you go, "Well, the heavy cruisers are only pointless as long as the Italian heavy cruisers don't show up. The Italian heavy cruisers show up, then you have a reason for having your own heavy cruisers." Because whilst your light cruisers might theoretically be able to beat them up, and you're sure they can theoretically on paper, in reality, you prefer to have your own heavy cruiser there to back up your light cruisers, just in case it turns out paper doesn't match reality. Because in wartime, you don't bet on a theory; you bet on you bet on what you know, and you hope for what you predict. So honestly, you end up probably with Renown, possibly a rebuilt Hood, maybe not, but Renown, Repulse, probably both out there. Maybe you've had Hood being sent out to India for its refit. That could well have been done, and it's more upgrade and modernization. That would have been one way of getting around it, and probably you have the Queen Elizabeths, some of the Queen Elizabeths, and some of the King George V's out there. Or something. Well, it depends. If the Germans are down to one battleship, I probably need to keep 3 of my King George V's back in the 3 fast battleships back in the UK, just in case. But and the R class can do the Mediterranean job, so I need 4 of them for the Mediterranean, and I need Rodney and Nelson. Will probably go to the Far East, to Sri Lanka. So I'll probably have them. I'll probably have the upgraded Queen Elizabeths. So Warspite, Queen Elizabeth, and Valiant will probably be out in the Far East. And the others will be back in home fleet, as all remaining are. And then King George V's. I'd probably have KGV out in the and Prince of Wales, or KGV out there and Prince of Wales back in the sort of the home fleet area. So I had them in each places. That gives me a fairly decent force, or I split them around. Because let's be honest, that gives me 6 battleships out there, and 3 to 4 carriers, which is a fairly significant deterrence fleet. And let's see, I have 5 R's, I have 5 Queens, I have Hood, Renown, Repulse, and King George V, and then Prince of Wales. And I have Nelson and Rodney. So I have 15. Yeah. That works. Ian Winter, do you think if the RN escorts had been fitted with Hedgehog, they would have done better at the start of World War II? Yes. Because the major problem with Aztec was that, and the major problem with Aztec was that you lost contact where you required 2 escorts to engage 1 submarine. Because 1 to maintain contact and 1 to fire, attack it, do the sort of the run with the depth charges. But if you have 2, well, A, both can maintain contact, and B, both can fire Hedgehog at the same time without running into each other. Or you can just have 1 engaging 1 submarine. Decision 90. Would the RN have accepted this treaty where they had absolute superiority in heavy cruisers with some slight inferiority in Americans' capital ships? Nope. Because capital ships are the big headline articles. The RN was prepared to accept the US having superiority in heavy cruisers, so the RN could have superiority in light cruisers. But they weren't prepared to accept that they could have superiority in capital ships. Frank Swan, let's see. What is the RFE for RN strategic planners if the Atlantic becomes too violent to cross during most of the year and the Spanish inherit the fleets from France and Germany? Year is 1912. Ouch! And then probably, woohoo! Spain's gone bankrupt! That's pretty much what would happen. Trying to maintain the French and German fleet of 1912 on the Spanish budget would have sent the Spanish government bankrupt in like 5 minutes. I can't remember the exact year, Danny Wright. When did the Royal Navy change from the Lantine sail and the mizzenmast to the boom and gaff like a schooner? But the advantages I seem to remember ran into control of ship and being able to get more power out of the wind. It felt to be more efficient. And some existing ships were altered when they came in for refit, yes. Desert Foxo, bit off topic, but do you know any good books that detail doctrine development of Royal Navy night fighting World War I and World War II, specifically the integration of radar into said doctrine? No, but I do know one's being written at the moment. Unfortunately, they didn't ask me to contribute, which I found cruel. But they're all very, very good authors, so they also the probable reason was what area would I cover that they weren't already covering, and just because I'd like to be included because I really like the topic isn't really good enough reason for including me. It's going to be good. It's going to be really, really good when it comes out. But guys, what was the largest concentration of battleships in World War II? Probably Pearl Harbor. Which sounds terrible, but it's true. It probably was Pearl Harbor. What is the RAFE for the US and the strategic planners if the RNIGN team up in 1931 against the USA? Panic. Scenario. Some insane PM, so me or Drac, comes to power in the UK, me or Drac, and announces a return to the 2-power standard now. What does the UK build, and how would the UK be able to maintain the fleet? It would be expensive. to power standard. Well, we'd have to maintain nuclear carriers to be equivalent to parity to the USN. And if we're as big as any two carrier powers, then I suppose the next, well, it's either India or China we'd add on to the US. So let's say we'd have to aim for about 15 carriers. So imagine a Queen Elizabeth class, but nuclear powered. Maybe slightly bigger. Just a tad bit bigger. The Type 83s would start construction a little bit more quickly. And a huge number of Type 26s and Type 31s. Basically, BAE and Babcock would get blank checks and told to just keep churning them out until we told stop. That's pretty much the only options. And then we'd have to work out who's going to build some auxiliaries, and we need a lot of them. Could we afford it? Theoretically, no, but it depends how much me and Drac would like to pay for it. In which case, if I was, any European nation which has a tradition of the Royal Navy making money by taking their shipping, I would be slightly worried. So I might tell the Royal Navy they could pay for it. They could have the ships as long as they could figure out a way to pay for them. Nothing's illegal. Go have fun. Yeah, 472. HMS Habakkuk and her sisters in North Pacific sending wave after wave of Lancasters bomb Japan. I'm not sure that would really help. It would be interesting, but it wouldn't help much. If you could send one message to the RN, which would be acted on 3 months before the Falklands War, World War II, and World War I, what you would tell them? For World War I? One message? How long? Because it could be fix shells, shoot Beatty. World War I, seriously, it would be fix shells, complete HMS Agincourt, and shoot Beatty. Remove send Beatty to the Far East. Before World War II, build more carriers. And build more carriers and don't stop. Before the Falklands War. Fine 40mm. Put 40mm cannon on everything. John Barron, in reference to Cruiser would there be a new HMS Belfast, or is Belfast still technically in service like Victory? There is going to be a new Belfast. One of the Type 26s is going to be called Belfast. Hello, Admiral BT, and I hear you're in snowy Virginia. That seems appropriate. Nice again. Free Admiral class aircraft carriers will probably use a Meso Kabir in Toronto, which probably goes the same as if Courageous and Glorious were there. Probably just slightly worse for them, basically. That's just even more aircraft turning up. It's just not good for anyone. But Des Moines had their own elevator in the hangar, and the aircraft fuel tank is in the very stern of the ship surrounded by a water tank. It is quite a good system. It does help. But I don't like where it's positioned, honestly. I'm just not that big a fan. Hello, Michael Patton. Hang on, does the RN have a birthday? They do. I forget where it is, but it's on the Wikipedia page. We tend to treat Trafalgar Day as the RN's birthday, though. It's kind of like they have a birthday and they have an official birthday. It's like they're the Queen. Hi, Robert Beck. That's right. Yeah, the Admiral class aircraft carrier Anson and Lustrous would probably be a catastrophe for the Ranger Marina. There wouldn't be any Ranger Marina left. Because it wouldn't just be Anson and Illustrious. Let's be honest. If you have three of them, and even if you have three of them you have Anson, Howe, and Rodney. Rodney. It would probably be Rodney and Anson and Illustrious at Taranto. Because Rodney would never be. There would never knowingly be a scenario where an HMS Rodney aircraft carrier would not be there to fire a launcher aircraft. If any random Royal Navy carrier happened to be off the coast of Hawaii before the attack on Pearl Harbor and would launch a counterstrike, it would be an HMS Rodney. She'd just be that sort of ship. You just know it. Even as a battleship, let's be honest, Rodney had a habit of turning up where there was action. Give her in a carrier air group, just imagine the sheer mayhem she'd cause. But guys, the USS Salem's Des Moines class elevator hangar doors still work and can be seen in the movie Battle of the Plate. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Night Security One. I'll have a look for that in a bit. Night Operations. I was looking at the bridges of the rebuilt Victorious, Hermes, R12, Ark Royal, R9, Eagle, R5. Why was there such variation in bridge of these ships? One's circular, two resemble half of a hexagon, and Victorious is like a box. Was it experimentation, which proved to be best? I want to scratch build a multi angle deck and want a bridge that late 50s RN would have gone for. I'm talking especially for the area where the windows were, not the whole island. You're probably, if you're looking at what the Maltas would have been looked like, I'd go for Ark Royal R09, because basically there is experimentation, and R09 was the one which was preferred the most. And Paul, hello. Rearmament Cruising Model 2. The Iron effectively had 4 Devonshire class, 1 Duke of Edinburgh class, 1 Warrior class, 2 Monitor class ships around by 1919. Plus a few Monmouth class and older ships. That leaves 8 ships of the first 4 being quite old, slow, and small in the other 4. I think the latter 4 could have technically been reconstructed to provide good heavy cruiserish vessels, but none of the ships would be a bit too long and toast to me and things. I think the Duke of Edinburgh and the Warrior class could certainly have done something. The Minotaur class, definitely. And I think they could have been rebuilt. But it would, again depends on the tonnage you're allowed. If you're allowed 18,000 tons to reconstitute them, then they can be really, really good. Hello, Vintage Car History. How are you doing today? But go to how do things change if the US enters the European theatre of war, World War II in 1939? Then there's a huge different problem for the Germans. Because if the Americans enter in 1939, just imagine the resources which the RN has to play with, that the Americans have to play with. Suddenly you have the entire Atlantic fleet combining with the home fleet. Because that's what would happen. The Atlantic fleet's battleships would come and join the home fleet. There's no point in being off the other side of America. You have the American cruiser groups joining the British cruiser groups, joining the French cruiser groups, hunting the oceans and clearing that. It's just not a good scenario for German surface raiders. Deutschland herself probably gets caught at that point, because there'd be American cruiser groups out hunting her as well as British in the North Atlantic, in which case there's just not fun for anyone. It just isn't good. And as Karl Gauss pointed out, Mussolini declares war on Germany in 1940. There is a real logic behind that, because if American troops are streaming across the Atlantic and going into France in 1939, then think about the resources which are on the French front. Well, think about the resources which end up in Norway. There are American, British, and French troops coming across. There are American, British, and French troops in France. Huge numbers of American troops. There's American aircraft and bombers coming across to the UK to operate from the UK and attack and bomb Germany. It's just massive, the amount of resources you'd have. Yes, they're not cumulatively themselves perhaps as big as they're going to become in American parlance, but the forces that they would be able to send would be a significant boost in anyone's paper. Let's check. I've got the right one. Yeah, I have. And report as spam. Sorry, I just spotted a very weird message. Okay. Hello, Rosansky's binocular supplier. Hello, belated New Year to you all. Hello. This is Fox. A war breaks out during the Abyssinian crisis. How does things play out? What kind of victory does the RN achieve, and what kind of peace is made, given the problems with naval invasions and campaign? Well, to be fair, if war breaks out during the Abyssinian crisis, then there's probably the Italian Navy gets sunk. Because the Germans aren't ready for anything during the Abyssinian crisis. And if the Italian Navy gets sunk, then the Italian army, the Italians are probably forced to withdraw from not just Abyssinia, but North Africa. Which could actually change World War II, interestingly, because it could mean that the Italians end up focusing on their army and then on their navy and their air force even more, and the army doesn't get much. But it could also mean that Mussolini falls from power. And if Mussolini falls from power, yeah. I'm trying to come from to Sparto. Dr. C, book time? I'm trying to get there. Answering questions. Nightingale 6831. Whose enterprise benefits the meaning of the name? US or UK enterprise? Both. And it depends. Are you talking about Star Trek as the meaning of the name Enterprise, or the word Enterprise as the meaning of the name Enterprise? As the spirit that encapsulates it. I would say both. They're equivalent. One's a science ship, one's a carrier. Admittedly, technically, it's a Enterprise itself on Star Trek is a cruiser, but we'll leave that to one side. For example, Doug C. Largest concentration of battleships in World War II, Okinawa. You might be right, but I'm not sure, because you see, the thing is, there are a lot used during Okinawa, but they aren't always all there all the whole time. They're moving around. Whereas Pearl Harbor, they're all there at once. And you said concentration, not largest deployment. So that's why I went with Pearl Harbor. Let's hear on. If the Hood sisters had been carrier converted, I bet they'd have 27 Gloucester Sea Gladiator Mark 27 Blackburn Skewer and 36 Fairy Swordfish Mark 1. Doubtful, but you can carry on. No, because the RN didn't like working in odd numbers. That's the option. You can, if you can make those divisible by 6 or 12, you can get numbers which the RN would have worked with and deployed on a carrier. The 36 Swordfish, fine, but I think you'd have the others would be 24 and 24, or would be 36 and 24. And I wouldn't be surprised if you ended up with 36 Swordfish, 36 Skewer, and 24 Sea Gladiator, or 24 Full Mars, which would be slightly more of a pinch, but could probably be accommodated in that. Hello, Nook. Hello, Carl Harmon. Ian Winter, with your message, fine 40mm, could they have thanked the 40mm off Belfast and recommission them in time? Probably. This is the Royal Navy. They can adapt these things quite quickly. But there was plenty of 40mm available around the time. The trouble is, it was all sitting in warehouses. I know, because I've tracked with my Clarke about this, and they are, yeah. So anyway, where was Gilead Secretary during Toronto, and why couldn't the planes get to it? It was in Taranto Harbor. It was just surrounded by the other battleships. That's the point. Instead of clear, if you ever go to the videos I've done on Taranto, you'll see the picture of Taranto Harbor. And basically, for you to do a torpedo or bomb run on and Giulio Cesare, you are going to have to fly over 2 other battleships from pretty much any other angle. You can hit almost every other battleship with impunity, apart from Giulio Cesare. Not sure who was still laying them out, but obviously they decided Giulio Cesare was their favourite ship and they didn't want anything to hurt her. Not a, vintage car history. What is your favourite fictional warship? Sci-fi or normal? If it's normal, it's probably HMS Revenge, the battle cruiser from Thomas Raymond's battle cruiser. If it's sci-fi, well, there's a reason the Glorious Heritage class are the class I'm looking at in March. Do you think being in Snow, Virginia, because if BT thinks it's okay to talk to English naval historians, it's truly frozen over. Frank, sorry, does it? Would the RN actually have a good use for as many carriers the USN has if the Empire was still around? Yes. They'd be scaring everyone else and protecting the Empire. Sonic, the IGN gets a Flannex anti-air system in World War II. How does that change the war? The US Navy loses a lot of aircraft. A lot of aircraft. Sujan 90. Do you consider dedicated light cruisers as destroyer flotilla leaders like the Capitani Romani Omaha Kuna classes to be a worthwhile concept? Not really in my experience, but they did try them. Not in their experience. They're viable in World War One. In World War Two, you can get other things like Triber class destroyers, which can do the role quite well if they wanted to. Kaham, me and Pioneer are gonna scare you soon with our fantasy RNLI LPD. It's worrying our way on here. I look forward to it. Nitigran, how did the US react to the RNs? How did the USN react to the RNs Free Admiral Class 2 Courageous, Furious, Eagle, and Argus? I'm guessing a lot more Lexingtons get converted into aircraft carriers. I'm not sure how many Lexingtons get converted into aircraft carriers, but if they've converted to Courageous, and basically you're saying that they've allowed 5 conversions instead of 3, the USN's probably allowed 5 conversions instead of 3, so instead of 2, so the USN probably gets 5 conversions as well. So that means there's going to be the Lexington carrier class is going to be 5 ships strong, which will be fun. Basically, every single one of their battle cruisers will be turned into an aircraft carrier. They'll have a uniform class. Could present some very interesting things for World War II. Gordon Smith, BBs all have personalities. Rodney was that mate that on a night out always manages to meet idiots and schools them. The Warspite wasn't the girl who beats you in arm wrestling. Yeah, I'll take that. Danny Wright, after World War I, the Royal Navy kept most town class cruisers until the Kents commissioned. However, Birkenhead and Chester were quickly sold. That the reason why is going to be explained in the video about the town class cruisers when they come out in later this year. Carmen, are USN joining RN 1959? Would there be a fast battleship with some groups hunting commerce raiders? If there are any available, there will probably be. There were some fast battleship centered hunting groups, so probably fast battleship carrier battlecruiser hunting groups would still be going on. But they didn't have any in commission in 1939, and the British didn't really have them in commission in 1939, other than KGV, sort of. Scott, if the USN joins the war in 1941, the Battle of Denmark Strait could be Prince Jurgen Bismarck versus North Carolina and Prince of Wales. Definitely not a good time to be Bismarck. It could certainly be, or it could be North Carolina, Prince of Wales, and Hood, which is more likely. Rolansky Binocular, what was the order for rebuilds of Hood, Repulsed, and the rest of QEs, and how long would the war need to be delayed for them to be completed? About 4 years, 4.5 years, probably, to get most of the rebuilds done, because they were accelerating the rebuilds as they were getting more and more yards online. Hi, George Newman. Yeah, I've heard that the US military goes from a combined force of 500,000 men in June 1940 to 16 million by the end of World War II. Pretty, that's not far off it. But that is, vast majority of that is the expansion of the Army and the US Marines and the US Army and the US Marines. Seriously, the Air Force expands, yes, and the Navy expands dramatically, but ground forces go. Nothing absorbs humans like infantry divisions. Nothing absorbs humans like infantry divisions. The casualties, the actual the actual personnel for them, and all the other things they sustain, it just saps your human strength completely. As for the order of Rozensky's binocular supply, I'm fairly sure Hood was next. Repulse, I'm not sure. She might have been replaced by Vanguard if Vanguard had come into service. But the QEs, I think it goes Barham, Malaya are the ones left, but I'm not 100% sure if it's Barham, Malaya, or Malaya, Barham. I think it's Barham, Malaya. I think it's Barham, Malaya, but it might be Malaya, Barham. Hi, Ray Sky Meerkat. No, Dan Freeman. I believe that the order was Nelson, Rodney, the Hood, less likely to two Qs, and probably not Repulse. Nelson and Rodney were going to be done, but Hood and QE. It also depends on what level of refit you're talking about. You're talking about a full massive rebuild or a full refit. Hood is probably going to get a rebuild. The QEs a major refit. Repulse not likely. Nelson and Rodney more likely a rebuild. And I found one document which suggests that maybe I'm right in that they were going to get some extra engines so they could go a little bit faster. Well, extra boilers so they could go a bit faster. Or more powerful boilers. They're deciding between the two of them. Very funny. Good on some of. Let's hear on. Would the British have the same issues converting the admirals that the US ran into with Lexington Saratoga, and how they'd solve the conversion issues with those Lexingtons? Probably less so, because honestly, the admirals would have been how I put it. The British experience of Furious meant they had experience converting ships and they knew what not to do. With this, you can see in how they approach Courageous and Glorious. What they probably do is they do Courageous, Glorious, and then the Admirals. So, and you have to remember, they would probably just go, right then, we have got you up to. I think the Admirals, as far as I understand, the three Admirals were pretty much up to what we call their lower strength decks. So they were hulls that were watertight. They hadn't put in engines, they hadn't put in turrets, they hadn't put anything like that in. So they're basically just build. You've got the bottom half, you've got the hull and bottom half of a battle cruiser, and then you've got the deck before the main deck below. Basically, you're doing from the deck below the main deck up. You could build yourself, so you could redirect the exhaust to an island structure. You could, you're losing a lot of armor. You're losing a lot of weight from that regard. You're losing all the turrets, all those things. You've got lots of stuff to play around with. They could do a fairly good job. Again, the British have an advantage because they have experience. As you listed off yourself, the British would have Furious, Argus, Hermes, Eagle, probably courageous and glorious in service as they were, or in service or in construction as they were starting the admirals, that experience is going to pay off. So I think as well that the Lexingtons, if especially the Americans are doing 5 of them, the first 2 will be more problematic than the last 2. Frank's on, let's see. You're in charge of Taranto Harbor. Where do you put your ships? Not that you know what will happen. Probably the same way they did. That's about the best you can do in Taranto Harbor. It's not that big. That's Rusky. And Bromberfan. Is it because of the ship's body? No. It's because it's the first sci-fi ship that you've had on television, other than Red Dwarf, which could actually repair and rebuild itself. Made sense to have a capital ship like that. And it had fighters, and it had blades which deployed, and missiles which could launch thousands of missiles. It had unmanned, uncrewed systems. It had my favorite, the planetary bots, all sorts of things. It was good. Razansky's binocular supply. How long did the flares provide light for, and from how high were they dropped? And how much did they hinder the night vision air guns? They were dropped from, is it 3,000 or 4,000 feet? They were dropped from they were dropped from about the cloud line. I forget what that was. The plan was to drop them from the cloud line, and they'd stay aloft for minutes at a time, and they were very, very bright. So it's like you're looking from daylight over there, which is silhouetting your ships against it, and that's even darker. So it becomes very difficult. If you imagine, it's not so much that that's dark, it's the transition from I'm in light to that's in the dark. That makes it difficult. Modern productions. Okay, say Admiral carriers come into being and twin-engine monoplanes developed for the RN. Assume it's something like, or even outright, Beaufort or a Mosquito. Probably more Mosquito. How useful limited would that be in a Toronto raid? I imagine part of the Swordfish success in Toronto was its low speed and maneuverability. You do it in a different way. You are right that the Swordfish success in Toronto was due to partially low speed and maneuverability. You are completely correct. However, I have a feeling the RN would have probably gone with, well, because they'd already looked at it, but they decided that the tension wire was the best system for the aircraft they had. They went with the tension wire system, but they might have gone with a parachute torpedo system. More importantly, you might be able to carry, with a twin-engine aircraft, you might be able to carry either a heavier torpedo or even more torpedoes. But also, you would probably, and this is going to sound strange, go to a tactic which the British had in their pocket, but they didn't use at Toronto. Well, they sort of used, because they didn't. If you remember, they have some of the Swordfish carry bombs, and their purpose is to go for suppression of enemy air defenses. Now, if I have a twin-engined Mosquito-style aircraft, then I might use that for straight-up suppression of enemy air defenses. In which case, are you fitted with cannon? Good. Can you take rockets? We have rocket designs. Now, they haven't got rocket designs in service at that point, but they were developing them. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised again. If you have a twin-engine aircraft, the modus operandi changes, and you might well have pushed it forward. And in which case, you could well be seeing an aircraft using machine guns or cannon. Again, twin-engine aircraft, they could have cannon mounted in the nose inside the aircraft, so it'd be kept warm and could be dealt with by the pilot or etc. If it goes wrong, if it jams, the observer could quickly play around with it and get it working. So you could well have cannon, and if you have cannon and rockets, or even just cannon, you can do some heavy damage to well, the balloons. And if you take out the barrage balloons, then it doesn't. Then your maneuvering aircraft, it matters less if they're slow, and if they're slow, you have your torpedo probably designed to drop at a certain speed. and they come in, drop it, and then accelerate and get out. So it's still doable. And of course, you probably hopefully would have more of them. And you could launch from a longer range, and you therefore might be able to get even more damage done. But guy said to know, how did you ascend type aircraft do in the European theatre in World War II? Quite well. Jennifer, not to nitpick, but the Battlecruiser in Douglas Truman's book is HMS Reliant, one of my favourite Douglas Truman books. Oh, I get that wrong every time. I call it Revenge instead of Reliant. I have no idea why, but I always call it Revenge instead of Reliant. Sorry. Nordic Wolf, yeah, I love the Glorious Heritage class. It looks like they're the best mix of diplomacy, capability, and firepower to back its diplomacy up that I've seen yet. Granted, I have yet to sit down and watch ST. Trust me, there isn't a better one in Star Trek. I have checked. Next time, Dr. C. Battleships and Siri go straight. Would that count? They're not from one side, are they? Admiral Beatty. Yeah. I'm going to report. I remember Vanguard was sort of scrap in order to keep 2 cruisers in service. By 1958-59, 5 light cruisers were in active service: Sheffield, Belfast, Gambia, Bermuda, and Tiger. And arguably Swifter was in service, plus Birmingham, Mauritius in reserve, plus Lyon and Blake under construction. Which 2 cruisers would have been kept in service? Yeah, I think it was Lyon and Blake. Considering that Birmingham and Swifter was scrapped by mid-1960, Gambia and Sheffield were in reserve by then, and Belfast and Bermuda were in service, plus the 3 Tigers. I think it was Lyon and Blake. The decision to trade off Vanguard, a proper cruiser killer, effectively, 2 obsolete-ish cruisers make much sense. It's the same manpower personnel to be in 2 places at once. You always prefer to be in more places, and the others were effective cruiser killers because they were cruisers. Maybe not as effective as the Vanguard, but. Oh, Richard, is there any truth to the story that the Fleet Air Arm pushed their Corsairs overboard in 1945 to avoid Lebanese lease repayments? I'm fairly sure some did. I think quite a lot of went over the sea. Were ports into the sea, because as long as they, didn't survive the war, it didn't matter. If USS North Carolina is at Denmark Strait, how likely is it that Hood survives and doesn't take the fatal Golden BB to blows her apart? Well, considering the firepower on Bismarck has increased by more than 50%, yeah, that's probably going to be painful. It might still have the Golden BB, but there again, she's going to have to be dealing with a lot of things. Let's see. In case you answered before, HMS Vanguard versus Bismarck. How much better does she fight than Rodney? It's pretty much the same, really, but Vanguard versus Bismarck, Bismarck couldn't run away. With Rodney, she can get away. With Vanguard, she can't. That's good. If a ship has to pump seawater into the turbine steam loop, how much does it shorten the lifespan of the boilers and turbines? Depends on the pressure, but salt water will dramatically shorten the lifespan of the boilers and turbines. We're talking you're talking that it could be you cannot possibly overestimate how much hot saltwater steam damage that can do. That can rip tubings apart, but in terms of turbine blades, it can clog up nozzles. It can lead to calcification on nozzles, especially if its steam isn't working as the same purity level because of the salt content. And then you have the turbines being damaged themselves. You're talking your life expectancy could be shortened by as much as 80%, depending on the pressures you're operating at. is as I understand it. I do point out naval historian, not marine engineer. That read QE class refibs. The RN refitted just before Warspite was Barham, so she was the freshest, albeit hadn't done to the same depth rebuild as Warspite, Vanguard, and QE underwent. Yeah, that's why I think she'd have probably been after Malaya. But there again, she's probably quicker to do because you don't need to do as much to her as you need to do Malaya, so you can get around there's for and against the both of it. I was reading that the engines of Hood were estimated to last till about 1942, peacetime operations. Those in Nelson and Rodney weren't very happy and needed work, hence the order. I'm fairly sure Nelson and Rodney are okay. They do okay in war. They want to upgrade them. They want to make them faster. But I'm fairly sure Hood would have been done first before them. I'm fairly sure that's... I know I've seen the order you have, but I've also seen the order in the archives where Hood comes first. And I always think that's more likely. The Colin Cameron, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Yeah, they're my favourites. Hello, Sean Coding. Leah Gazamer, hello. I just want to ask you a question. In your opinion, would we have another dreadnought ship like ship as in the ship so powerful makes other contemporary obsolete in comparison? If so, wouldn't it lead to an arms race? You can argue you're always in a bit of a perpetual arms race because people are always trying to build better ships than other people have had. The arms race is the arms race because of the way the people focus in on it and the way the nations themselves have to focus in on it because of the way it's built to their publics. Is it possible we have another dreadnought-like ship? Yes. The first ship to be fitted with working railguns. That'll be a dreadnought-like moment. If the Japanese get there first, ouch. If the Americans get there first, ouch. If the Chinese get there first, holy guacamole. If the British get there first, ouch. That's the four nations you've got to watch at the moment who are pushing railgun research. The Japanese have said they're pushing it and are talking about it for the next class of destroyers. Because, and this you'll hear more about in Bilge Pumps when it comes out this week. Sure, you can mount gun pods as well. Yeah, but twin-engine aircraft take a while to get those. Dan Freeman, I don't think it's possible to have your favourite tankette. They're a hateful concept. It's like asking what is your favourite German World War II light cruiser. I have a favourite armoured car from World War II, but that's about it. In terms of something closer to tankettes. History. Was British shipbuilding bolstered by opening of the Erie Canal, or did iron and steel go elsewhere? It was helped to an extent, but it's one of those things. It was not as massive an impact as it would hope to be because it was of a globalization network. River Clarke, is there a credible argument that the naval treaties contributed to the outbreak of World War II? As the Royal Navy and US Navy could have massively outproduced all other nations in the area, although there would be no guarantees of funding by both governments. That is certainly a very viable argument because it actually puts the US Navy within strike range for the Japanese Navy. That's what they feel. Whereas if the US Navy and the Royal Navy had been able to just build as they wanted to, the odds are the only ones who had still been building anything by about 1925, 1928 would have been the US Navy and the Royal Navy. And as they mostly like to trade in a technological race rather than construction race, it would probably be in classes of 4 ships and going, woo, aren't ours pretty? Ours are prettier. No answer, no answer, no answer, no answer. It's been quite fun to watch. Pete Dawson. Final Mosquitoes had 4 cannon underfloor and 4 .303 magazines, machine guns in those. Late war night fighters had cannon only because radar was in those instead. Alfie Rowe, replace Hood with Incomparable. How does this affect Denmark Strait? Bye-bye Bismarck. I'm sorry, you get hit by a 20-inch shell. There ain't anything coming back from you. There just ain't. Although, to be honest, if Incomparable is around, there is an argument as to whether or not Bismarck would have been around. Dasher 2 Vachel. Very obscure and practice question and precise question here. The armament for the high velocity, low weight 16-inch shell and gun after a trial hit on a mark. Any idea where to find details of this? Trial details are on National Archives. I forget the file number, but there is an archive of the file. And a report was made to the Sea Lords at the Admiralty Board meeting, both that month and a month later. Rosalansky's binocular supply. What's the decision of Bismarck not to top off her bunkers due to Germans not having a tremendous amount of fuel, or just poor judgment? A bit of both. Sea Dodders. I read a while back in an alternate history scenario where HMS Anson was kept as a weapons systems tenement long enough to be sent to the Falklands. Would this have been plausible and effective? It would depend how she was upgraded, but it could well have been plausible. As for effective, well, let's say she turns up and she only retains her one quadruple turret, because that's probably do the forward quadruple turret. If she only retains that, then that's a scary advantage. Basically, she probably becomes the Commodore Michael Clapp's flagship. And from San Carlos Bay, she can pretty much reach anywhere in the Falklands and go, boom, hello. I was going to add a caveat that I cannot compete with someone who has seen the actual papers in the National Archives, and so only seen the bits up on the Hood website. I know, and there is certainly an argument and an official listing which has Barham going and a sort of Nelson Rodney before Hood. But then if you read the actual archive documents and the files, it seems to me likely that Hood gets in first, especially depending on which yards are going to be free. And I have a feeling Camel Laird's would have been free. Were looking at the work list, Camel Laird's would have been free, and in which case Hood's going to them. Al Rashid, high salinity marine boilers will begin to degrade heat transfer efficiency almost immediately and create differential surface temperatures that make tube ruptures extremely likely. Yep. Thank you, Stafford Thompson. Not a wolf. Thank you. And thank you, Dan and Stafford, for chatting, for doing the normal adminning. Sean Quinn, Germany's light cruisers are wonderful. With the provision you're in charge of them in World War, or just blitz nowhere else. They are good in that. Take care, not a wolf. Nice agreement. Your characterization of British ship sounds like how I'd like to expect one of the Royal Navy's Canton shipgirls would act. There are a few of them like that. GDM, hi, hello. Hi, Doc. How historically reliable are autobiographies of Jellicoe, Beatty, and Percy Scott? All three of which are free downloads from Google Books. I'd get them all, but remember, Beatty's is Beatty. I would say of those, Jellicoe's is the most unassuming and least egotistical. Percy Scott's is the most scientific, and Beatty's is the most, oh my god, what are you trying to claim yourself? Nice everyone. If Incomparable exists, Hitler wouldn't dare send out Bismarck. If Incomparable exists, what the frick would the Yamato class look like? That's the question. What would the Japanese build as a super battleship if Incomparable is in the world? Hello, Oswilski. Where are the fluffies? They're in the house at the moment. Greg Salsey, does Belgrano sort here for KGB's on station? They might, but the odds aren't good for that. And also at that point, then you could well have the KGV going towards it, and you might end up with a very, as it is, you might end up with them telling the submarines on the carrier to take the shots first, rather than the submarines on Belgrano, and Belgrano coming face to face with 14-inch guns. Given some things that I've heard that Britain is leading in fusion power research, would this tech not give the nation that got a proper working reactor a leg up for railgun mass drive research? Yeah, it would. That's why I included them in the list. Finish Guy Street. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subs at about the plus 1 year anniversary of my channel. I only need about 60 people to get there in 3 weeks. If you want to give a plug, I'd appreciate it. Vintage Car History is trying to get to 1,000. Come on, 60 of you. Go say hi to him. It's good stuff. Send a tweet to me on Twitter, VCH, and I'll do a tweet out for you. Gonzef, one quad turret on the Anson would have saved lives at Goose Green and made Stanley Airport a flight-free zone. One quad turret on an Anson would have made most of the Vauxhall Islands a Argentinian-free zone. It would have, in case of, the Argentinians are up on that mountain, sir. Which one? Tumbledown. Okay. Do we want to send a battalion up there? Wait a second. Now send a battalion up. Casualties report, sir. We've picked up the Argentinians. It's not nice, but 12 high explosive 14-inch rounds hitting that mountain would have dealt with pretty much anything you had there. Dan Freeman, reorder for refit. I thought the Iron didn't want to have 2 or 3 of the 3 far ships in deep refit at the same time, so Hood wouldn't go until Renown comes out. Yeah, Renown would come out in time, and frankly, they would be happy for it to go. Thank you, George Freeman. They don't want it, but they'll do it if they need to. And remember, they've got KGB coming online soon, so they can afford to fudge things. Mm-hmm. Ah, yes, that's a question. Rozansky's binocular supplier. Dr. Clarke, with your experience studying in National Archives, how much historical view paradigm shifting information remains sealed, and when roughly would the last of it become unsealed? There's tons in there. Most of it's unsealed. There's also a huge amount of stuff which never made it to the archives not because of anyone being nasty, but honestly because people just didn't think anyone would be interested, so they just didn't file it away, and it went to the burners and got shrunk down because you don't have infinite storage. There's tons there. There's huge amounts of information there. And the thing is, you can learn a lot by reading in the margins and reading through and putting the information together. This is the point. You could have someone come and they can tell you one thing because they read one set of materials. Then someone else come and tell you something else because they've read another set of materials. And if you go and read both sets of materials, you can then come away with a completely different view because you synthesize those materials in your head. So that's what you get from the archives. And also, people go in there looking for different things. That's what I found. When I went into the archives looking for something on destroyers, and I knew people had looked at these documents and all these things, some of the documents before, I found things in them they had never mentioned. And the reason was because they just weren't interested in those in what that document mentioned, but vis-a-vis that. Sonic Canoe, what was the worst name of any RN ship ever? Seriously, some of the flower class, I just can't pronounce them. Frank, sorry, obviously, if you're reading this, you may have caught up. I haven't. There's a little blue arrow appeared at the bottom of the chat. I keep trying to catch up. Oh. Tristan, been thinking of World War II cheetah fleet, and I come back to 2,700-foot hulls, 8 for carriers, 8 for armored cruisers, 2 fast oilers, 2 replenishment ships, plus 7 destroyers. Commonality for easy logistics. Yeah, it could work. I honestly, myself, I'd say if you want 8 for carriers and 8 for heavy armored cruisers, you probably want to double the number of fast oilers, maybe even triple number of fast oilers, and double the number of replenishment ships. So I would say not 2,700-foot hulls. I'd be going at least 24. I'd be at least 24. It would be 6 fast oilers, or 5 fast oilers and 3 replenishment ships. You could probably make it work with 5 fast oilers and 3 replenishment ships, as long as you can keep a cycle of the fast oilers going backwards and forwards to wherever the slow oilers are. Well, I'm skipping binoculars. Could the IJN actually build something much bigger than the Yamato? Well, that's the interesting thing. They probably couldn't under existing circumstances, but if Incomparable's been built, they might well go to the effort to try and do so. And remember, the French have already proven that you can build ships in multiple yards and then weld them together. So the Japanese might try that. Build one half in one yard, build another half in another yard, and you weld it together. One more McDonald's double cheeseburger to go, then back to moving boxes in the pod. So long as my phone lasts and cold, you'll be me us. Although I hopefully won't be. I won't be able to monitor while backing. Don't worry, you've done an excellent job. Thank you very much for all the help. New IQB 4472. I found a PowerPoint on the internet about USN CBs. Do you want them to send it to you? Please do. Nightic run. IGN design A150 likely gets built. I can't remember comparable, but how does the US react to incomparable? Tillman? Anyone? Montana's probably get built. At least one of them. Honestly, if the British have incomparable, there is a whole nother debate about what happens to the treaty system, because the British aren't going to get rid of incomparable, so that means everyone else, which means the limit of guns probably goes up to 20 inches, which means everyone else is probably building a 20-inch gun battleship. Oh god, that could have an effect on the treaty system. You're allowed 18 battleships, all of the size of incomparable. Oh my lord. Let's just do the maths on that one. So she would have been 46,738 tons in his idea. Let's be honest. Let's say well, Okay, so that's pretty much Hood, but she's got 20-inch guns. So let's say though, when she gets built, she's probably going to end about 50,000 tons because the RN is going to want more armor on her than Fisher's put in there. So, and she's succeeded by the Admiral class. But let's say she's built incomparable 20-inch guns. Let's say she's built from 1915 onwards, and she's therefore in service by about 1918. So she's seen the end of World War One, and she comes into service just as World War One ends. Maybe they're building Admiral class. Honestly, if you're building one incomparable, you're not going to stop with building one. So you're probably going to build 2 or 3. So they might be building the incomparable class, which means you might get incomparable and Hood, both built to 20-inch size. In which case you've got, let's say they come in at 50,000 tons. You are probably dealing with someone turning around and saying the Britain and America both have budgets of roughly 900,000 tons when it comes to battleship construction. And the Japanese would have a budget of, let's say, 7/10 on that, so 9 times 7 is 630,000 tons. So they'd get 630,000 tons. The RN and the USN would have 900,000 tons as their limits. That would change the treaty somewhat. But if the British have 2 50,000-ton battleships with 20-inch guns, then yeah. But also at that point, then everyone's going 20-inch guns is now the limit. In which case, you probably do not get King George V's, which are 14-inch guns. You might get King George V's, which are 16-inch guns. But honestly, you change World War II to a point to which 16-inch guns are your entry-level weaponry systems. No one's going to... If you've got battleships going around the world in 1918 with 20-inch guns and you've got 2 battle cruisers, let's say, going around the world with 20-inch guns, then you're in trouble. But I have a feeling, especially Incomparable and Hood, if they've been built by the Admiralty, they'll be more like 50,000 tons plus. They'll probably still have the same speed of 35. Maybe they'll drop down to 34 knots. Because it's a lot of... You can drop a knot of speed and you can save a lot of engine power for other things. But if you can do 24,000 nautical miles at 10 knots and you have a top speed of 34, 35 knots and you're 50-something thousand tons, you are not going to be something that anyone's going to be able to ignore. And that's as long as the British have only built 2 of them. Again, you have the fact that the RN have 4 admirals under construction, and Incomparable would have started earlier. So if the British have 2 or 3, or they've really got behind it and have decided to churn out 4 of them, then you have Britain's answer to everyone else having 16-inch gun ships. At which point, you probably have some very scared people in the world. Some very, very scared people in the world. Senator, how would the modern navies react to someone building an old-style battleship with VLS tubes and big guns? They'd probably be interested. It would have to be something like rail guns, etc., for the people to be really worried. Listen, Foxo, was there a naval equivalent of the Conqueror heavy tank, a ship that was very good ship for its time and role, but got overshadowed and nulled by a more adaptable and smaller ship? Vanguard? Very good for its time, but honestly, you don't need it by that point. Dreadnought, how would the RN have fared in Typhoon Cobra? Probably about the same. Maybe slightly better, maybe slightly worse. It depends on the situation. It's the people who matter more than the ships in some respects, and their experience. I think the British would have had to use section construction to build incomparable. No, they wouldn't. And the reason I say they wouldn't is because they had two yards which they felt could be expanded to build incomparable. So they wouldn't have used section construction. They would have built they would have got the yards already. Southampton would have been expanded, and I think Camelairds would have been expanded, and they probably have expanded one of the naval docks as well. I'm reckoning probably. It depends whether it's easier to build it out or build it into land. Probably Portsmouth gets expanded. It wouldn't be Chatham. Might be the Welsh one. Mm-hmm. So now, guys, which would be more useful, a cruiser submarine or a pre-dreadnought converted into a carrier? A pre-dreadnought converted into a carrier, as long as I could change the engines for turbines. Colin Cameron, I seem to recall that at least one unpowered, decommissioned USN warship was towed across the Pacific to use for some reason I've forgotten. Were any other unpowered supply barges used to increase tonnage? Occasionally. It's a way of moving something around if you want to put in a defensive position somewhere. Did you see vintage card history? Ooh, I have a top secret document I created. An Excel file that just lists every car manufacturer in the world that existed pre-1933. Took months to write it. Well, you want a copy? Sounds cool. Thank you. Accurate report. Read. Treaty system has been adjusted to the standards of incomparable. At 40,000-ish tons, you can't get too many 20-inch guns, good armor, and decent speed. Maybe nations would build Montana-type vessels, maybe with 18-inch guns, 8 of them, or decentish armor and decent speed. They might do. They might do. They might not. I'm not sure. JSL, incomparable conversion. Me and Drake have done some simulations on that one in our chatting away about it, and it goes interesting for everyone. Alfie wrote, if 20-inch guns become standard for tree battleship, doesn't arm become irrelevant? That's the problem. Admiral Beatty, hello. Thank you for the money. Are you aware of any mountain tracks to sabotage against Cabu Iron during the war? Any of these attempts are successful? Not really. There are some attempts, it does seem, but none of them seem to really be successful because the RN crews tend to be fairly hot on it and fairly suspicious people. They're kind of like the US Navy. They're incredibly suspicious. Not quite as paranoid as the Poles, but incredibly suspicious. Under Paul, since we're discussing ships like incomparable, I've seen a fair bit of 500,000-ton Japanese battleship designs recently. 10 116-inch guns in 50 turrets moving at 42 knots. While the construction is impossible, even by today's standards, what sort of power plant do you see in that behemoth? A nuclear reactor is about the only thing that's going to get it to 42 knots. Sorry, that sounded a bit strange. A nuclear reactor is about the only thing that's going to give it enough power to get it to 42 knots. Otherwise, you've got a lot of oil plants, and I mean a lot, or a lot of gas plants probably would need it. Fuel plants might not be dense enough power to weight ratio. It'd have to be gas turbines, and a lot of them. But I think a nuclear reactor is probably a better bet. So anyway, if the Second Naval Treaty limited gun caliber to 14 inches, but didn't limit ship tonnage, and no one left, what would people build? Some big 14-inch gun ships. You would probably in the nicest way, the RN would have built a 20-gun battleship. They're not limited in tonnage. They would probably build something which looks like an F-class forward with C turret raised, then B, then A, and aft X and Y. Or maybe even a 24-gun 14-inch ship, like I think you were talking about earlier. Shunko, it's a shame no one's building incomparable today. We're going to need a bigger boat name. Some memes would be epic. Yep. Jermac, old history in 1940. Surfing invasion scare. RN found shed with set of 18-inch guns and double turrets made in 1914 for Agincourt. Would they put them on Vanguard? Yes. If they found it and they had Vanguard what they felt could take it, they would have put them on there. If the RN found a shed with, I don't know, 6 18-inch guns and 3 turrets, they would have modified Vanguard to take the 3 18-inch gun turrets. Or whatever battleship they actually built would be able to take them. It might be they take one of them of the King George V. If you're talking about finding in 1940, it might be easier to take one of the. It might be easier to take Howe and convert her. John Shea, are you sure the USN would just build 2 20-inch gun battleships, then just build Essexes or Midways, or just Yorktowns at the lower end? The thing is, there's your reaction in 1918 and your reaction in 1939, 1940. In 1940, you might do the carrier spam. In 1918, the carrier spam is not a viable thing. The aircraft are not there, not at that level. They can be a nuisance to ships, but they aren't really sinking something the size or capability of a battleship. So your only option to remember again, there's a level of conservatism in this approach, okay? But that's a sensible thing because you don't risk a nation on a flight of fancy. Because you might be right, in which case you'll go down in history as being gloriously correct. But you might be wrong. So it's better to always hedge your bets. So as a rule, you'll invest in the carriers and you'll invest in the submarines. But you'll build the sodding great big battleship as well. So anyway, what would a 20-inch do in a shore bombardment? I see your hill of artillery on it. That hill is now a lagoon? Potentially. I actually have a good example of that here. Let me just put up a picture. And media files, images. Go to desktop. High CPU usage detected. Cute. Okay. Basically, you telling me I need to get a tower, aren't you, XSplit? You're telling me I'm trying to do too many fancy things on you. This is what I want you to look at. The size of the shells. This is the Dreadnought's 12-inch shell. As comparison to the Incomparable's 20-inch shell. 12-inch. 20-inch. 12-inch. 20-inch. Colin Smith, incomparable class names, probably incontestable then. Potentially, or they could go down the Admiral's route, which wouldn't be unusual for the RN. Especially if they modify it from Fisher's ideas to something more like a fast battleship. Which is what I think they would do. I think you'd end up with a 20-inch gun ship. I think it might have 6 or 8 20-inch guns. I do honestly think that's an option. That it could go up to 8 20-inch guns, because the RN could insist in their conservatism that they need at least 8 guns for a broadside. So it could become sort of an incomparable hood hybrid. I do think you find at least Queen Elizabeth level armor. So you're probably dealing with 13-inch, maybe even 14-inch worth of armor, if they go with an all or nothing route. On the sort of belt, it could well be an angled belt, and yeah, it's not exactly a ship which anyone wants to end up fighting. Nighttime Productions. Question for and everyone. Are there any good videos of warship doing 30 knots, preferably shot from someone not on board, to give us an idea of the object of that size moving at speed? There are some good videos of US Navy aircraft carriers going at full pace on YouTube. Just type in US carriers and they tend to come up. Strong Ugly. Questions for Dr. C. Hello. What goes into acceleration top speed when building a ship? Could one build one for an excellent acceleration over a given distance, like a dragster? If you're talking about a ship rather than a speedboat you can build to be a dragster. Straight lines, massive acceleration of speed. Don't want to try and maneuver in it and anything. If you're talking about a ship being built for speed, then the acceleration is going to be constant up until they reach a certain point at which the sea itself is the thing that's slowing it down. They just don't have enough power to overcome the friction of the water and the sheer amount of energy of pushing the water apart fast enough to get through it. So that's your limitation. Basically, the faster you go, the more water turns from being this lovely flowy substance, like my own brew here, to being more treacle-like in its terms of effect, to being like sandpaper, to being a solid wall if you're hitting it hard enough. Nightingale, what were the planned changes for Battlecruisers Anson, Han, Rodney? Let's put it this way. They were getting slightly better armor and were getting progressively more secondaries. And progressively, I think actually they could have actually got slightly faster as well. New York 472. Would Incomparable fit on the ships and in the dry docks in Belfast to build a Titanic and sisters? They need some modification. That was another the R's looked at. Rosansky's binocular supply. Didn't anyone try mechanical stokers on capital ships, or were all the coal-fired ships hand shoveled? I think they did look at mechanical stokers, but I think they decided it was cheaper to shift to oil. That's the thing. That's the trouble. At the same time as you have mechanical stokers really showing up as a viable thing, you also have the options to transition to oil, and oil's a lot easier for the Navy to go with, anyway. Colin Cameron, if an RN crew is not on their toes, the next ship over would loop them down to their deck plates, never mind looking at the saboteurs. Exactly. Thank you, IKB472, and thank you, Vintage Car History. I will have a look at it. Ken Brown, question. Any ideas how long it took for the RN to sort out their ammunition handling issues at Arthur Jutland? Did they have to issue any orders or training? Basically, it was a case of Jellicoe did it by a lot of informal, you will do this. You will follow the code and rules of conduct and the rules of practice. Rosensky's binocular supply. How bad would the dispersion on the 20-inch Italian shells be? Oh, good lord. That all depends on their quality of manufacture. If it's the same as they're not a 15-inch, it's going to be, it's going to be terrible. Because they're just going to take it and go even further because they have more momentum and energy. Matthew Malecki, I wonder how incomparable would have been with triple 18-inch guns. That would be interesting. Let's leave that to one side. General, Dr. Clarke, are there any modern ships that won't be mission killed by missile hit? I think of US Starking and Edge Sheffield. There are a few ships which could take 2 hits, but they're mostly carriers. They have the mass to absorb a hit, and it depends where they hit. The missile hits. In winter, with the hit rate for big guns in the 1910s, 1930s, would a 20-inch gunship have a risk of running out of shells and be then sunk? But the ships with small guns, by the ships with small guns with more shells. Those small ships would have to catch up with them. B, if they're small enough to really catch her, then she's got secondary guns to deal with them. Also, why they have torpedoes. And B, honestly, they're fairly good. The RN's larger gunships were fairly accurate for their time. Yes, there's a risk of running out of shells, but she'd carry a lot of them. And I mean a lot of them. That's one of the reasons why she's as big as she is. Another of you. I think that's the wrong one. I got rid of Havag. That's good. Americans. I'm not sure if you've heard you address this question with regards to Gavarro yet. How do you use it in World War II? Keep it in the home fleet as an ultimate triad to Bismarck and Tirpitz? It depends how many I have. It's not really a ship I want in the Mediterranean. And there is a reason the RM battlecruisers seem to rarely turn up in the Mediterranean. It's not really the area where you want something that relies on speed as part of its survival. But if they have been modernized and upgraded, then they're probably good things for the home fleet. If they haven't been modernized and upgraded, or at least one of them hasn't been, then they're probably out in the Far East. The question is, do they get caught up in the Four Seas debacle, or because of their 24,000 nautical mile range at at 10 knots, are they instead cruising somewhere not far off the coast of Japan, ready to launch a lightning boom, 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 boom? Hello, we've blown up Tokyo. We're now gone. Again, the RN doesn't have anything with a 24,000 nautical mile range in service in World War II, so we don't know how they would act with it. But if they had it, they'd use it. Following from previous questions, wouldn't Hood be refitted with increased armor engines from assistance? They'd modified the hulls on them, so I don't think she really could be. To Ben Grogan, I know the Russians made the Skrovel heavy. Have any service vessels ever tried injecting air from the front of the hull under pressure to reduce resistance? There have been attempts made at building what is basically a version of a hovercraft. Various attempts, not so far ones that have proved practicable for operational needs. Anak, Regia Marina frogmen did a good job of damaging RN ships in harbour in Egypt and Gibraltar. True, but those were Regia Marina frogmen. They weren't acts of sabotage. They were actual specialists, and they were fairly good at their job. The RM could be very effective when they want to be. Dan Freeman, Africa Middle East line is I think Suez, but the question is really one, where we need to consider physical geography and humans. Ronski's binoculars play. If the world builds 20-inch battleships, what did the Spanish do? Just take their Hispanos and go home and cry? Honestly, there's not much they can do. If they try building new battleships, then they have to afford them and they have to decide what they're going to fit on them. Banham, what was the reason the Royal Artillery didn't adopt gun calibers from the Navy? Like, say, 120mm guns from destroyers instead of, say, the 25-pounders of World War II or 6-inch guns for the heavier stuff? The weight of the guns and moving them around. The Navy guns are often heavier. Dreadnought, what was the reason for moving away from the tripod mast? Anything was better. Let's be honest, the tripod mast doesn't really help you much. It's better than the lattice mast, but that's like saying that I don't know, sellotape is better than masking tape. Yes, it is to an extent, but it depends what you want to do. We'd still prefer to do things up with gaffer tape. It'd be far tougher. Just be very expensive. Come around. Hang on, I missed one. For example, let's see. Why didn't Germany use Frogman or have Italy ones gone? Italian guns go off the R in the UK? The Germany did try to use Frogman. They didn't manage to get anywhere. Banham, particularly during World War One, Army heavy gun calibers would make more sense for the army given shells were already in production. True. You're getting close. We can always hope. Kevin Brown, question: we have any estimate on how much the Incomparable would have cost to build relative to the other super dreadnoughts of the time period? I think there is some estimates. Let me see. Doesn't need to be a cost estimate I can find at the moment, but I'm sure that I think there was one done somewhere. No, IKB 4472. For human geopolitics, I think Suez and West would be Near East. Suez to Indus River, Pakistan, Middle East, and India, and East as far east. There is all sorts of arguments on it. Pardon me. John Barrett, a hood carrier, perhaps designed somewhat like a Kagi or not? More like a Courageous and Glorious on steroids. Next one, Kabbalah baby. Paul. Old history question, and a slight tangent to present discussion. The Iron were allowed to retain 2 extra capital ships under the Washington Navy Treaty. Would they retain 2 of the KGVs or the 2 Lions? Probably the Lions. The reason being that as much as I like the KGVs, the odds are they retain the Lions because they're more easy to upgrade, and they have if they're getting a 2 advantage, it's probably given on the codicil that they're battle cruisers rather than battleships, so they don't have an advantage in battle line over the US Navy, or rather a reflection of the fact that the US Navy's battle line is entirely battleships, whereas the Royal Navy's has those, in which case they'd have Tiger and the 2 Lions, as well as the Renown, Repulse, and Hood. So they'd have a battlecruiser squadron of 6, and if they're allowed, if they're allowed Nelson and Rodney still, then they get to they can basically have 2 battle squadrons of 6 and a battlecruiser squadron of 6, or they can divide them into squadrons of 3 if they really want to. But you know, things become more viable, let's say. But probably you end up with, the 5 Queens and, let's say, Nelson forming 1 squadron, or one battle squadron. The 5 R's and Rodney, because it fits, forming another battle squadron, and then Hood and the other battle cruisers forming the battle cruiser squadron. Vanguard, I was less meaning hovercraft rather than cavitation, using the pressurized air to foam the water to make it far easier for the hull to cut inside. Yeah, there have been attempts, and the reason I was mentioning hovercraft was because there have been attempts of that and hovercraft to try and work it out, but it hasn't really cut through into what we would call, as said, a practicable solution. Andrew Paul, apologies for diversions because I'm working up a slightly different Washington Naval Treaty version, and this question keeps cropping up on that. Yeah, they would go for the battle cruisers. Mainly because for the RN, if you have a battlecruiser force of 6, then you can probably base. You could divide that squadron into 2 sets of 3. So you'd have 6 battleships and 3 battlecruisers based in the home fleet, 6 battleships and 6 battleships based in the Mediterranean, and 3 battlecruisers based in the Indian Ocean, and that works. And the odds are you go with. Do you go with the 13.5-inch ships or the 15-inch ships for the Indian Ocean? They're your only 13.5-inch ships in the service. The rest are all 15-inch and 16-inch. You've got 2 16-inch ships, and you're putting them one in home fleet, one in med fleet. All the rest of these ships are 15-inch ships. So do you keep your 13.5 at home, because that logistically means you just got it at home, you've already got the stuff at home, and put your 15-inch in your Indian Ocean, because then you've put your 15-inch you've put infrastructure 15 supporting 15-inch in the infrastructure in the Indian Ocean if you need to rapidly deploy. Honestly, that's what I'd do. That's what I'd do. I'm not sure if that's what BT and the admirals of the of the 1920s would do, but I think that's what I'd do. And thinking about them, they might not start off with that, but they would do. They were considering deploying a squadron, so I'd reckon you'd have Hood, Renown, or Repulse would end up being the cornerstone of the British presence in the Far East, and they would be the squadron based at Trimcommely in Ceylon, and that's where they based them from. So they'd be based from there, and instead of being the China station being the lead, the lead fleet commander for the area would be the East Indies station. So the East Indies station would get the full admiral. It'd be kind of interesting because you'd want them based to support the China station. That you want be the admiral, but you'd want to have it all. You want to have them different. So what you might end up doing is you want them based in Ceylon because that's less threatening to the Japanese. Because if you base them at Singapore, you don't have the facilities for them, support them at that point, and all those things. Whereas you can base them there, and it reassures the Australians, etc. But you might end up with having to make their squadron commander de facto the commander of the East Indies squadron. China station would have to be a full admiral because that would have to be a vice admiral in charge of that squadron. The other stations would be commanded by, well, there wouldn't be another station there, but so that you'd have it so that the vice admiral would take command of the forces at sea, with the admiral being the theatre commander based at Singapore, and that would be your wartime structure be set up. In which case, the admiral in Singapore would be the commander-in-chief Far East de facto from 1920 onwards as the senior officer out there. In which case, you might end up with a very different Singapore and Malaya scenario. Rosansky's binoculars still about. Are there any currently serving hoods in the RN? I'm not sure about that one. New IQA 4472. Would a 20-inch battle cruiser make 12-inch battleships into 20-inch battleship make 12-inch battleships into heavy cruisers for all intents and purposes? What does it look like? Dreadnought. What would an HMS Tiger modernization look like? Probably 14-inch guns instead of 13.5-inch guns if they're modernizing it, depending on the period, though. Better engines, slightly more armor, dual-purpose guns, secondaries. Probably 4.5-inch or probably 4.5-inch ones. Jennifer, a re-tripod mass. Surely weight was the main drawback. World War I ships had less superstructure, so weight was less of a concern than in World War II ships. True, but you can work around that. There's also the fact that with tripod masts, they get very problematic in terms of their protection. There's a Foxtrot. During World War II, tanks would fire their guns even if they could not see nor had hostiles in sight to show their presence and scare off any attackers. The ships do this too. Rarely, because it reveals their position. And the fact is, you can engage at tremendous ranges. That's the other thing. Whereas tanks might or might not be able to see their opponents and still be in engagement range. For a warship, it's rare they're in engagement range and can't see their opponents. Vintage Car Street. I read somewhere that Lawrence Pomeroy did make a proposal in 1913 to the British Navy to make Davitt launch cars built by Vauxhall for use on British warships. Have you heard of this? Yes. It was to support the Royal Marines. Boko Disraeli. Hello. Would the 20-inch rifles of Incomparable be too much gun for the fire control technology at this time, and with their presumably longer firing cycle? Interesting thing is their firing cycle would probably be roughly the same as a 16 or 18-inch gun. Honestly, they were looking at automating a lot of it. One of the interesting things. That's the most ambitious part about the 20-inch guns: the sheer amount of mechanization that would have to take part in its loading, because of the weight of the guns. This is how massive they are. So it would have been interesting, let's say. Fire control would have been... It was a lot better. The trouble is, we often look at the fire control of 1913 and of 1916, and we presume... we don't realise how big a change has happened by 1918. But post-Jutland, the fire control in the Royal Navy goes up a long, long way. Very rapidly, they start making changes. So I'd say by about 1920, the fire control would certainly be at a level at which the 20-inch guns would be more than useful. Bound Home, what design improvement lessons were made after the Falklands? Just size matters, or was there some big changes to British ship designs? In terms of 1980s, the British ship designs, a lot more emphasis on close defense, CRWS systems, and a lot more emphasis on subdivision of the hull. Plus, aluminium doesn't turn up in warship hulls in Britain anymore. Andrew, there would be many people with the surname Hood. From memory, I know Admiral Hood's family still existent. True, but I just don't know if any are still in the RN. I wouldn't be surprised that these things often go in families, but yeah. Go on, Cameron. If the shared HMS Tiger recommissioned had as many phalanx as the RN could could steal fitted, would she have been used as a fleet defense ship at the Falklands, or would the armor have set off the dun bombs? She'd have been there. How she'd have used would depend on which fleet she's attached to. If she's attached to the Amphibious Task Group, she does things with them. If she's attached to the Carrier Battle Group, she does things with them. So she's probably useful either way, but what she's used as depends on which group she's with. And the fact is, Tiger could go either way. Vanguard would more likely end up... Vanguard, Anson, any of the battleships would end up with the Amphibious Task Group. But a cruiser would probably... It could well end up with the Carrier Battle Group and only joining the gun line at night. Take care, John Shea. When you get to the Portland class, there is a great book called Sweet Peter War. At this rate, I'll be getting to the Portland class in about March. Or probably February, actually, at this rate. I'm currently managing to record roughly 1 to 2 videos a day, most days. I did one today. You'll know about which one it is because it'll be the same. I'll be wearing this shirt when you see it. Sea Dodders. Regarding Anson in the Falklands, she retained both forward turrets, got 2 twin Sea Dart, 2 twin Seawolf, 8 Exocet, 2 Ikara, 2 Mark 8 4.5-inch guns, and a Hiller hangar plus associated radars. Why did she have the Mark 8 4.5-inch gun? The twin 4.5. Why did she only have 2? Probably would have had about 4, but okay. Yeah, it doesn't matter if she has 4 or 6 14-inch guns. That's just not going to be something nice to come up with. That basically becomes a case of boom, boom. They probably used they probably fired 2 of the quad and 1 of the twins as a salvo, and then they fire another of the other pair of the twin out of the quad and the other twin. Again, just to sort of mark their shots as they're firing, or just check they're hitting the right target. When they're sure they've zeroed in, then just blast away merrily until there's nothing left. Why did the Germans think they were safe from the RAF in Brest and Norway, given the RAF bomber command proved them wrong repeatedly? Hubris. Schumacher, Clarke, what were Naval supposed to do? Well, the idea was they would be able to take them with them in operations, so they'd be able to, if they landed Marines or landed a naval unit to do fighting ashore, they'd have a vehicle to manoeuvre them, but they'd also have a vehicle for staff work and those sort of things when they had to make official visits. Instead of you having to get there, your boat take you to shore, and then sometimes the captains would have to walk to where they needed to go, which could be risky, or they would have to wait for a car from the local embassy, and it was considered an efficient idea. Take care of Zelensky's building Nokia supplier. I have to admit, it is getting close to 9 o'clock, so I will try and catch up. I was going to go through some questions, but then I'm probably possibly going to head in and take care of look after the dogs. Because I have 2 fluffs who have both been ill this week, so I'm trying to keep an eye on them a bit more. They're getting better. They are better. They are both on their way to being a lot better. They both picked up a tummy bug, which wasn't good. Trust me, you've never seen dogs which look more like mine. I don't know what's happening, Papa. Really? You don't? No, Papa. Well, let's put it this way. When you eat food, it goes through and comes out. It does, Papa? Yes, it does. You sure? Yes, I am. But why is it coming out now, Papa? Well, because you need a loo. You sure? Yes, that's why it usually comes out. Sure, Papa? Yes. Sorry. Yeah, it could be a 472. If Singapore and Malaya don't fall and British 14th finally ends up in China, does the Boma Road get turned into a railway to supply the 14th? You've got a second part to that question. I could be 472. I can tell. You've got 1 or 2, so I'll leave that there. After the San Carlos landings, the story of how the Anson received a pair of Zeus 23 2 land mounts that someone had found amidst where some Argentinians used to be. That just seems useful, but slightly unnecessary. Dreadnought, have you heard and what do you think of the tabletop games Fear God and the Dreadnought's Commander Sea? I've heard of them, I haven't played them, so I wouldn't like to say anything about them. Pete Dawson, railway requires flattish land, but the Himalayas are between India and China. The thing is, they could sort of build a railway. This Pete Dawson, this is going to sound strange, but they did actually have a railway route mapped out. It's not exactly the easiest railway route in the world, but for someone who has seen some of the Welsh railways the British have built, and some of the railways they've built in various other places in the world, it was be possible. I'm not talking about a railway like like a standard gauge railway. A narrow gauge railway is probably what they were built, and that would have been more viable. So expect a sort of Festiniog style railway. I don't think Raider and Donitz ever actually said that, but they probably were quite disturbed them. Yes, it was part of all history where Argentina received some material assistance from Cuba. Oh, cute. And then discussed the Queen approves of the shirt, perhaps. I think she probably has one. When Argentine pilot got shot down and captured by Iran, it looks like they arrested him. Why? What would be the reason? That's what you normally do with people when you capture them. It does look similar to an arrest. Sea Jodders, there was another old history where HMS Eagle received her Phantom refit. It was on the cusp of being commission when the warship Falklands happened. Was sent with Phantoms, Buccaneers, and Gannet AAW. That would have had a massive impact. Still waiting for IKB 4472's finishing his point, because he did a 1 of 2. Senator, the TRA and Taffer was sick. They both had tummy bugs. Their ones actually last longer. My mum and sister managed to get food poisoning. Not from my cooking. Yay. Actually, I was the only one who didn't get food poisoning and didn't get stomach trouble. My sister cooked for her and mum, and she cooked for cooked some meat for the dogs. And she does this quite regularly. We alternate between the roles. And she didn't cook for me because... What was it? I had a voucher. And I was working late. So I said, don't worry about me. I'll get a pizza. Because I have 50% off at a local pizza place. So, I'll say... So you guys don't have to worry about me. I'll bring a pizza down to my office and I'll quietly eat down there while I'm working. You guys have a nice meal, So they did. They all got ill. It was great fun. I was looking after 2 dogs and 2 humans with food poisoning. Oh. I survived. Senator, imagine the Queen doing an official address for that shirt. I could imagine the Queen doing this one. The difference is, though, it's going to sound strange, but if the Queen got one, you just know one of them would have a crown. Madame Productions, another call for Wilson's What If. The models are built and carry on operating until the 90s. What's their fate scrapping? What's their fate scrapping or possible purchase by any like the Hermes? If they carry on to the 90s, so they do roughly 40 years, they might be sold to India. That depends how much longer is left in the whole life and what they think they can get from them. The interesting thing will be to see what they're replaced with, what the Queen Elizabeth class look like. Oswalski, HMS Repulsor renowned versus modernized Italian battleships. Who would have won? It's all 4 of the Italian battleships versus Renown and Repulse. then they have an advantage, but Renown's been modernized, Repulse hasn't. They certainly have an advantage in firepower, but Renown and Repulse can dictate the engagement range. And their 15-inch guns can do considerable damage. Honestly, I'd say it'd probably be a draw, because I don't think Renown and Repulse would want to stay in range long enough to blast them away. But I don't think the Italians could capture them, could catch up with them. So it would be a case of it would be a draw. And that's one of the reasons why, again, the battle cruisers weren't used in the Mediterranean that often. Renown occasionally escorted Ark Royal, but it was very rare. Usually it's a battleship, because the fact is, the RN, any of their R-class even could stand a chance against a modernized Italian battleship. It wouldn't be easy, but they could stand a chance. A modernized Queen Elizabeth versus a modernized Italian battleship is not much of a chance for the Italian battleship, because again, the gun differential and the fact that they're otherwise they're all pretty much equal. And if you have a King George V or a Nelson or Rodney, then it's just goodbye. Hello, Frank Spencer. Free. Yoko 472. Finally finished. Okay, let's go back to the original part of the question. If Singapore and Malaya don't fall and the British 14th Army ends up in China, does Burma Road get turned into a railway to supply the 14th? I found a World War II period map that labels the Burma Road as a railway under construction. We'll send a copy to you. I agree, and I think the railway we're talking about is a narrow gauge railway, not a railway that, as you would think it. And it was supposed to go. It could well have gone up. Found one that wended away to China. Would it have gone across the mountains? It might have ended up going through more the sort of Indo-China route, sort of down and round. But yeah, it was a narrow gauge railway if they've been building it, and that's not exactly going to be as good as a standard gauge railway in terms of supplies, but it's going to be a lot better than anything else as options. Trina, what is the perceived effect of each of the major powers anti-ship missiles? Cry. They're all much about the same. They're all fairly decent in slightly different ways. I would say the Russians have big ones, which if they hit you, they're going to cause a lot of trouble. But the Western powers mostly have smaller ones, which are more likely to hit you, and so you're more likely to get multiple hits. And the Chinese, well, they're sort of following a Western trajectory. And people like to say their systems are mostly copies, but they have Chinese slants on them, and that's something which shouldn't be forgotten. Mm-hmm. Give me a second. And that one. No. I can hear a mighty fluff wolfing. I think the YouTube did not like the map, so I sent it to you in Discord. Thank you. What is the perceived effectiveness of each major powers? Answer one. Gordon Smith, recaptured enemy arrest. They are prisoners of war, so a capture is much the same as an arrest. This also gives them a number of rights and protection. Mm-hmm. Oswaldski, the iceberg which sank RMS Titanic versus a Second World War era new battleship. Could it sink a battleship? Depends where it hits the battleship, and depends on what speed it hits the battleship. It would be a lot more difficult to sink the battleship, because the battleship doesn't just have horizontal bulkheads. The battleship doesn't have vertical bulkheads. It has horizontal bulkheads as well. So it's less likely to sink the battleship. It could, if they're really, really stupid, but it's probably not going to. It's going to cause a lot of expensive damage. Nice agreement. At the end of the dogfights episode for Hunt the Bismarck, narrator said the fate of the giant Bismarck was proof that the sea was now controlled by the sky. How accurate is this last part? Well, considering the damage the air did to the Bismarck was finding it and sticking a torpedo into it, which slowed it down, you can say there's an argument for it. But saying that it's proof that the air now controls the sea, I'd say it's a proof that the component that control the air is now a component of controlling the sea. I came before Sun too. I know that the railways are made on meter gauge. With a generous loading gauge, you could probably fit an M3 light tank on it. Probably. Let's see. What books do you want to read off? I will do this quickly. So, I've got some cool books. So, boom. There you go. There you go. British Warships of the Second World War by John Roberts. Now, this is an older book, which finally got a decent copy of. This is about my third copy of it. It's published by Chatham Publishing in 2000. Now, there's a reason I like it. You might recognize the front of something there. Now, the thing is, it's taken me a while to get a good few copies of this and to track them down. And it is one of John Roberts' earlier books. As you know, I have his more modern British Warships Second World War up there. But I do like this one because I like the text in it. And I also like the fact it has this in it. It has a lot of Ds. This is a full cross-section diagram of a very certain aircraft carrier. And the main thing it's good about is it shows you what the differentials are between the carriers. So this one is, it has all the layers of indefatigable. So you can go, hello, 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 oh. And HMS Kent. Now, why am I showing this to you? Because it's an old book, it's difficult to get hold of, it's annoying to track down. Because there was a recent discussion about whether it was, if you could get that to the effect that, you know, new editions are always better than the old editions. And actually, the point I'm trying to make by showing this book to you, especially this copy, which is a very good quality copy, and it has a picture of HMS Naid in it, which I'm specifically proud of because, of course, my old car, which has just gone, my old Subaru was called Naid. New one's called Aurora. My Subaru is a name for Royal Navy cruisers. My family names their cars, and to stop it getting a name bestowed by the lovely female part of my family, all of them, who outnumber me, I quickly name them myself. Anyway, this is Naid, Dido class. The point is, a first edition to a second edition can be quite different. There can be different factors in it. It's one of the reasons when referencing, I tell my students if they're putting it in, they always have to put what edition they've read of the book in there, because there can be changes, and there can be advantages to having multiple editions of the same book. So always check before you start thinking, oh, I already have that book. I have the new one of that. Oh, that's good. Sometimes the older one is just as good. British Warships of the Second World War being a classic example by John Roberts. Thank you, Bijan. Oswalski, what was the best Japanese World Destroyer class? I think it was the one I can't pronounce the name of. This book, World Naval Review. It's out. Seaforth, 2022, World Naval Review. Always worth a read. Always worth interesting getting. And I've been over before what some of the interesting authors in here are. However, what I really liked was this turned up in this book. And this is the proposal for South Korea's aircraft carrier. And to me, that looks freaking cool. It also does look like a Koreanized version of a Queen Elizabeth class, but leave that to one side. It looks like someone's taken a Korean class and got a Queen Elizabeth class and gone. Yes, but this is not. This is not. That's the British aesthetic. This is going to be the Korean aesthetic, and it looks really cute. It's also my answer to anyone who goes, well, you know, the number of aircraft carriers in the world are decreasing, and I go, by whose metric? The number of carrier powers are decreasing. By whose metric? The Royal Navy's dropped its number of aircraft carriers, but it's still got them. And there are other nations building aircraft carriers and getting them. China's a new entry into the aircraft carrier race. Japan has now admitted they've got aircraft carriers pretty much and are building more. South Korea is looking at building carriers. There's a lot of India's getting its carrier fleet up and running, probably. All right. So, have you got, as you have a poodle or corgi shirt, have you considered Union Jack shirts with different breeds of terriers on it? No, because then my corgi and my poodle might gang up on me because they don't because that's not them. As it is, if with the poodle and the corgi shirt, I have at least one dog on my side. Megaran, I know for fighters using guns there was an issue of convergence on different ranges. Is this the reason why close weapon system by and large seems to prefer one gun rotary cannons over multi-gun mounts? It depends which approach you're talking about, and to be honest, the Russians seem to be going back to the multi-guns. It's all down to logistics and the amount of ammunition you carry, really. Bad Home, let's say Ark Royal doesn't sink in 1941. Would she have been able to keep up with new aircraft designs later in war? Yes, because she has quite a big hangar. It wouldn't have taken that much modification. She has a fairly big hangar. Anson's Navy, building a fleet for Empire, 1744 to 1763, is, well, it tells you the seamen, it tells you the admirals, it tells you about the dockyards, officers, but what are the things it really tells you about? Is the logistics. And you have this, which is just cool, these flat maps of where they have ships in the world and how many ships are in those fleets and how many ships line, how many frigates, and it's a really good system and it's a really cool book. Answers Navy. But what I'm going to do is I'll try and go through these books in another Bruships. Probably next week. I'll try again for them. I know sort of 3 hours really aiming to do this week. Always a pleasure, they're not. Shumak, sometimes people change their stories to carry favor with people between editions. Nighttime Bronx, if you ever buy a race car, call it a deal. Warspite if it's a monster truck. Oh, I have Subarus. They think they're race cars. They're cruisers, but they think they're race cars. They are very comfortable. And the reason I have a Subarus is I've had Volvo, Vauxhall, and then I had my first Subaru. And I'm on my second Subaru. And they are comfortable cars to drive. And I do a lot of driving. I will probably be driving up north again soon. I'll probably be driving up to Scotland at some point for research. I'll more than likely be driving down to Plymouth and down to Portsmouth for research and all those. And the Subarus just get me there. they're comfortable. I said I've owned one. I've driven now 4, and yeah, Subarus, they're good. I like I do like a Toyota Hilux, and that was my backup. If I was gonna get something else other than a Subaru, I would have got a Toyota pickup truck, because I do like those. But I was told by my mum that frankly that wasn't parking on her drive, because that would take up the entire drive. But it's very comfortable, and it can take a lot of books, especially if you have the whole back covered, so you can keep the books don't get wet. Am I right in that the Bismarck sinking wasn't the Death Knell of the battleship? That it was the Prince of Wales sinking that was the Death Knell of the battleship? There wasn't a Death Knell of the battleship. That's the trouble. Okay. 9681. What happens is there's a lot of historians and a lot of people who publish about Death Knell of the battleship, because after Vanguard and after the Hours, no one builds more battleships, because everyone builds carriers. Because honestly, the only people who they'd be building battleships against would be the Soviet Union, and they don't build battleships, so no one builds battleships. But if the Soviet Union, if Stalin had stayed alive for a little longer and had built more battleships, then you would have seen the British build battleships and the Americans build battleships to maintain their battleships. And we wouldn't be talking about the death knell being World War II. Because the death knell of the battleship, the battleship as a concept is only problematic once you get to the point at which you can no longer provide sufficient armor to allow you to withstand the first round of hit. Because that's what it is. This is the point I always try to make people. Okay. Let's say this is my armor plate, and this is my shell coming in. Boom. I'm warped, but I resist the first shell. It's when the next shell hits that I go boom. So the armor is about resisting the first impact and only deforming slightly. The next shell will probably get through. Might not, but might do, especially if it hits the same spot. Unlikely to hit the same spot, but that's sort of the maths you're playing. It's once you get to the point that there's no amount of armor you can stick here that will resist the first shot that you know that the battleship stops making sense. At which point you end up with a sort of battle cruiser scenario. So there's an argument that all ships are to an extent battle cruisers now, but we'll leave that to one side. Definitely they're more likely cruisers that are happier with that one, but to an extent they all have more firepower than they're armored against, because they can't be. So anyway, would railguns diminish the prime role of carriers? No, I don't think they would, but they would actually make carrier battle groups far more dangerous. Stromac, will the North Koreans try to build a carrier if the South Koreans do? Oh, who knows? That'd be fun if they do. Frank Spadana, Dr. Z, do you think the Japanese will use names Yamato, Musashi, Akagi, Nagato? Akagi, Nagato, maybe Yamato, Musashi. Not sure about that one. Sav Thompson, all breeds matter. I do agree they all matter, but only 2 breeds currently live in my house and can store and can have access to my bedroom while I'm asleep. Damn him, just got caught up on James Holland's bit on Model 2 TV, where he said he got told about a lot of new sources after hardback published, so sometimes add stuff into paperback. Doesn't surprise me. I have a list of stuff which would go in a second edition. And if I had managed to visit, let's say, if they're printing around, but if they do a second edition of my book, The Lovely Tribal Battles and Darings, after I've managed to visit Canada, which is on my list for this year, to visit Haida, then you would probably find a whole lot of stuff about the Canadian tribals would get added into it, because I'd have had my visit to Haida, and I'd have all the research I'd done before, but also hopefully, I'm hoping to combine, if I do a visit to Haida, with a visit to the Canadian Naval Archives to do some research there, and gather some primary resources from the various information, because the Canadian Naval Archives isn't compared to going from Britain to Hamilton in Ontario, getting the Canadian Naval Archives from Hamilton, Ontario is not a long way. And so I would sort of want to include that. So that would get added in, and that would extend the book. And the same would be if I managed to visit HMAS Vampire, the Australian daring class. Then the stuff on the Royal Australian Navy tribals and their sort of daring class would go into the book. But they haven't gone in because due to COVID, I didn't get to go to those archives. I didn't get to go to visit those ships. And I felt it disrespectful to the historians who have done all the primary research to just produce a book based on their primary research because I couldn't get there because of COVID. I didn't want to do that. And I like to do my own primary research as well. But I could give them proper credit, but I wanted to have done my own primary research because then I would have felt more, how do I put it, more respectful publishing it than I would if I published it based off just their work. But guy, I don't know. Did the British try to use their first aircraft on their armored carriers in World War II? First jet aircraft. They did use some of their jet aircraft carriers on World War II, but they didn't get them onto carriers in World War II. They didn't get. It was after World War II they got jets. It took a while to get jets to the point at which they could land on aircraft carriers and operate in the saltwater environment that close to the sea. Thanks, Oliver. Let's see. When people like the Pilgrims made it to the New World as Escape UK, why did they use the same names over there? No one ever said they were that inventive. Bengo, speaking of ammo on the close motions, I know the phalanx is a drum under it, so it can be purely top deck. Which quick reload mechanism? What quick reload mechanisms exist? As I've heard, changing drum is 30 plus minutes. It seems like in any real hot war, this year seems like it could be better attrition of action if for a second attack were due to that long reload. Welcome to the joy of life. So, Thompson, the Hilux isn't that much larger than your estate, especially if you're a crew cab short version. Still flawed about your aunt on the Scooby, though. That was very nice. Ben Prolos, hello. If the treaties allow 16,000-ton 9-inch cruisers, would the French still build the Dunkirks? Yeah, but probably slightly different. They might actually find some better guns from them, or they've managed to develop some better guns from them. Or they might even buy British guns. That was an option the French considered. But if you have 9-inch cruisers going around the world, then you don't want Dunkirks you don't want 11-inch battleships. You're going to try and do something. And the only people the French could actually potentially buy from would be the British or the Americans. So they could end up with some 14-inch gunships or even 15-inch guns from the Brits or Americans. IKB 4472, why not build battleships to force the Soviets to build battleships? Because the Soviets are ultimately a land power and they don't give a hoot about the sea unless they choose to give a hoot about the sea. For them, the sea is a useful extra form of offense. For the maritime powers such as Britain and America, it's a necessary form of defense. Sure, Dan Freeman, I need to read more of stuff. He has some interesting takes conclusions. This podcast, he was talking about something like Cobra was always the plan after Overlord. Wouldn't surprise me. Jack Ray, is a battleship's armor a saving throw like Chieftain says about tank armor? Getting hit means one has done something wrong. Pretty much. Then Phillips, I've just finished Space Carrier Avalon. Thank you. Great book. Thanks for bringing the series to my attention. Which other series are in the same universe? Scary how the fighters are 6 times the weight of the M33. There's a whole series for Avalon. Okay, there's a whole series of that. And then Glyn Stewart has another multiple series which follow on from the Space Carrier. And it's the whole. There's about 7 to 9 books, I think, in the whole set in the whole universe he's done. But he also has another universe which are called Peacekeepers of Sol, which is on its, is it fourth or fifth book? I think it's on its fourth or sixth books already sort of planned, and that's another great series. That's in a different universe entirely, but that's worth reading. Both of those are worth reading, and the reason I like Peacekeepers of Sol is because it's about the difficulties of managing peacetime relations in a universe after a war. So it's all the cruising, the diplomacy missions. It does have fighting, it does have action, it does have tempo. And this is where you get a great writer. If you're a really good writer, you can make the diplomacy, you can make the issues that come up have drama and have impact, and that's what Glenn Stewart manages to do with that series. So both very good, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. Cascading, Dr. Clarke, how effective was the Chinese junk style of vessel in the Age of Sail? I said because I'm curious how junk style ship of the line would handle in comparison to Western style. Probably slightly more crew intensive, but ultimately as fast and probably just as maneuverable. Depends how they structure their sails. Right, Frosco, they already have a new Congo class, yes, but the Congo class doesn't have the same weight attached to the name. Shark also has significantly improved my opinion on Patton. I need to study his campaign more because he strikes me as similar to Sherman in that he does his best work when he's keeping troops moving. Pretty much. Patton is fairly good at logistics. Bad Guy Clean, what do you think of the F8 Bearcat? Love it. Thank you, Donald. Good night. Right, I'm going to be finishing soon. It's at 9:30, and I have fluffs to go and look after. And I still have, as I said, I have two family members who are still getting themselves. They're okay, but they're still. It's the joy when you have an entire out of the household 4 go down with food poisoning of various kinds. Let's be honest, 2 humans, 2 dogs. It was fun. The humans were over the food poisoning a lot quicker than the dogs were. And I am being very good. I'm not ribbing my sister too much over it. I'm just whenever she, like today when she offered to cook lunch, I might have collapsed on the floor and, you know, started holding my chest going, no, no, no. But, you know. And look, Aunt and Scooby, yes, my lovely aunt very kindly donated. Well, my car went, and I was worried about paying my tax bill, so I wasn't going to get a new car until after I paid my tax bill. And my aunt basically said, "That's silly," and she's given me some of the money for it. My mum's fronted some of the money for it, and I've paid my mum back. And my aunt said, "No, no, you don't have to pay me. You have the money," because she's a very nice aunt. Anna Paul, considering the Bat Fair X HMS decoy was only decommissioned in 2007, is it possible we have a second Daring class destroyer around today? Unfortunately, no. I'm fairly certain she was scrapped quite quickly after that. For example, let's see. Who the Italians building against before World War II? France. And the French were building against Germany, and the Germans were building against France, and everyone was building against France. Was basically the problem. Thank you, Sean Mack. The problem was also that the French was building against Germany as well. So Germans built the Deutschland class, French built the Dunkirk class, Germans built the Channels class, French built Regular class, the Italians built the Littoral class, the Germans built Bismarck class. France cries. Yeah, pretty much. It was fun times watching. Did Bud Guy did the US Senate ever engage any German surface ships in any World War? Ooh. I don't think they did in World War One, and in World War Two. I think their cruisers got involved in something, but I'm not. It was. I think it was one of the convoys. Right. Jack Ryan, Clarke. Re-tank, don't get hit. While I'm not good at tanks, a certain Whitman started his career as an armored recon jock. Seems to support this. Good night, Frank Spotto. Friend of Freeman, the French were stuck in the middle between Germany and Italy with too much land border and need for sea lines of communication to their empire. Anyways, Peacekeepers of Seoul sounds like a more comprehensive jag in space. Love to see the bilge pumps compared to the Lost Fleet and Avalon 2. Very different, but surprisingly similar takes on hard sci-fi. To be honest, all three of us are quite heavy Glyn Stewart fans in bilge pumps, so all three of us read his books, and yeah. Thank you, Jane Murph. Thank you, good night. Calvin goes, did you manage to get any reading from John Biggan's Sailor of Australia Canada's Warp Marine series? Series? They are sitting on my Kindle, waiting for me to get to. I have about 100 books currently on my Kindle on my list to get to. So, give me a couple of weeks, at least. And currently, I think Kindle's trying to give me a prize because they're going, you have read every week for 2 years. You have read every day for 2 years. It's a case of, yes, I know, because I'm behind on my reading list the whole time. But guys, were there any big sea battles in the Age of Sail in the Pacific? You're going to have to keep watching the channel because there's going to be some videos coming up. Not really massive sea battles, but there are a few that get close to the Pacific. Southeast Asia, mainly. Nice again. So I read somewhere Hood was to get her deck armor upgraded to 6 inches. What difference does it make to her? Heavy. it helps. John Barron, night and good night. Yellow Sage. Good night, Dr. Clarke. Interesting. Thank you. And very glad you support Seriously Avalon series. Enjoying the first one. Well, I enjoyed them. Thank you. Sometimes, do you think we could pass my large armor cruiser off as an oversized frigate given Lars Long Patrol? We could always try. I've seen the alphabet destroyers classed as utility destroyers. Why call them that? I have seen some people call them that recently as well. And I've never heard them called that. The Navy didn't. The Royal Navy referred to them as fleet destroyers. So I'm fairly sure some historian somewhere has decided to classify them as utility destroyers. And then probably the tribal class, etc., onwards as the fleet destroyers because they're bigger. But they're fleet destroyers. It's just the time changes. Basically, it's someone coming up with differentiations because it's good to classify things to get into groups. But the Royal Navy didn't call them utility destroyers; they called them fleet destroyers. They had fleet destroyers, they had escort destroyers, and that was it. And then, in wartime, they had large fleet destroyers, which were the tribals, to an extent the Jays, and the battles. And then they had the standard fleet destroyers and the war emergency destroyers, which were fleet destroyers, but they were called war emergency because they were stripped down to be built as quickly as possible. And then escort destroyers. Still. Strong argument. If you consider a surface U-boat as a surface ship, then not only did they engage, but USS Buckley had to repel boarders. There may have been more, but Buckley is the one case I remember. I'm still can't think it as a submarine. I don't know what one could have done about Malta, and I don't know. Hello, there's something fluffy wandering around. I think they've come to say goodnight. Hello, Fluff.
Match your t-shirt.
Oh, you've come to match the t-shirt and say everyone what you approve of the t-shirt, I presume.
Well, I was going to see what they thought I was.
Hello. You want a cup?
That'd be the most daredevil.
Oh yes.
You've got Yoda on your thing. I've been doing Yoda impressions today. Ears down. Yoda.
I'm worried about you. You worried about her as well? You've come to tap us for certain protection. Okay. She thinks you're doing Yoda impressions? I know, I'd agree. How are you doing? You feeling better tonight? Alright. So, I appear to have a Mighty Fluff join me for a second. I was just about to say goodnight for the evening, but I've got a Mighty Fluff to keep me company for a few minutes. So, as I've got Mighty Fluff here, let's answer some questions. Coming, I was waiting on my Kindle. I feel you. I would like to perform my toasts on myself every time, so at least two clones could sleep in one read. That would be a good idea. So the Tafra, yes, the Tafra has arrived. The fluffy research the trainee assistant, fluffy research assistant, the Tafra. We need a video on shore defenses with your sister. That'd be quite fun. Hello. You good boy? You watching? You watching for her to come back, or you watching? Just watching. Oof. She come back for you?
Yes.
Okay.
I just had to put bird food away.
All right. It wasn't anything you cooked for the birds, was it?
No, it was stuff I took.
Just checking.
Yes.
You okay? You haven't eaten anything she's cooked today, have you?
Yes, I cooked. She cooked me chicken. I'm fine.
You sure?
Yes.
Wolf once for no.
That's fine.
All right. I'm about to go check on all them. Okay. We need to build the rail line 40 miles inland, but you can. It's always a realistic is insidious. It's like its cousin paperwork. It multiplies exponentially when you're not looking. Yeah, that's true, Darius Rozalski. That's again. Why did the people think that the refit hood would do much better than a modified version? Is there any truth in that? Well, she'd have probably had a better radar fit than she did have, because the fit would have been less ad hoc and more of a purpose build fit. You know what I mean? Because it has the stuff which had been fitted quickly, whereas if they've done a full refit, they'll have integrated it fully. Her gunnery would probably have been better, and she'd have had reconditioned turrets and all sorts of things. So yeah, she probably would have been better, but yeah. But would it have? And also, the golden BB wouldn't have really worked, because that spot would have been less of a golden BB target. Right. Anyway, it is, as I said, now it is 20 to 4. It's 3 hours and 40 minutes according to my time. So I am going to say thank you very much for everyone watching, and I'm going to say good evening to you all, mainly because I'm going to go check on the fluffs. Because, yes, one might have come out, but I'm now suspicious that the other one hasn't come out, if that makes sense. So I'll go check on them. Did the US ships not fight some of the E-boats before or after D-Day? Most of them didn't get past 10th Flotilla. There are some discussions about some did have E-boats, but the Chanel boats, but they mainly got caught up by 10th Flotilla, which did their job of going, you're not getting past us fairly effectively. Good night, DG40. Good night, Sean. Thank you, Sean. Good night, Sean Quigley. Night, Carl Vote. And thank you, Stafford Staunton. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stafford and Dan and Sean, for your sterling work this evening. Thank you, Bug889. Thank you, M35 Benvids. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for all the support as always. Thank you for everyone who is a subscriber. Thank you for everyone who likes and shares and comments on the videos. All of them help the algorithm. and just thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this evening. I'm sorry we haven't done many books, but I've been answering questions, and I'm always happy to answer questions. It's one of the reasons why I've turned Bruships into a sort of more free-flying approach now, where I have a few books and I answer quite a lot of questions. I planned about 3 books this evening, and I thought going to be quite fair enough questions because there's a lot of stuff coming up at the moment. I'm doing a lot of cruiser work, and there's a lot of cruiser videos. I should admit now that I have got all the videos for January and most of the ones for February either recorded or about to be recorded. I actually recorded the first video for March today, and so they're going ahead quite quickly. I'm getting the cruiser ones done, and my plan is once I've got the cruiser ones done and blocked out till November, I'm then going to work on a load of 60-second videos and question answer 60-second videos, which will come out on Saturdays. Well, they'll either come out on Saturdays or Fridays. They'll probably come out actually on Fridays, because then I'll move the long patrols for the live videos to Saturdays, because that gives me time to record them. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Anna Rachel. Thank you, Manasaya Slavic. Thank you, Neoakibi4472. Thank you, M35 Benedids. Thank you, Pudguy829. Thank you, 96831. Thank you, Anuk. Thank you, Greg Sarski. Thank you, Sean Quigley. Thank you, Stephen Richards. Thank you, Dirt Squad. Thank you, everyone. Take care, and have a nice evening. Night, Colin Cameron. Night, everyone. Night, Ian Winter. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye. And if you haven't guessed, yes, I am giving you a full view of the Dreadnought and Incomparable, so you can have a look at it in close-up detail if you want to. Take care.